Okay, there we
Now
go. And we're live, and I will find my agenda. And we will get started. Okay. So believe it or not, committee, we are wrapping up. This is S13. It is a recent addition to the agenda. It actually sits in education, or it's coming back to education, but there is the elimination of these excess spending penalties in the bill, which could have an impact on the ed fund. So we have been asked to take a look at that, and Representative Ansell is here to kind of fill us in about why that happened, and and then Brad James is going to give us some numbers. And we've been trying to get Mark Peralt, but since I just left Senate Education, I know Mark and Brianna are both still there. So doing the yield bill, or what we did with the yield. Okay, so Representative Ansell, floor is yours.
Thank you. And for the record, Representative Janet Ansell. First of all, let me tell you where S13 is. It's in House Appropriations. There is an appropriation on the bill. The House Education Committee had reduced that amount, and I'm not real sure what House Appropriations will end up doing with it. So that's where it sits at the moment. Do you want me to talk only about the excess spending penalty change, or do you care about any of the rest of the bill?
Well, anything that would impact the ed fund, I think we'd like to know about.
So, yeah, go ahead.
All right. No, go ahead.
Well, let me touch on some of the changes that we recommend, that the Ways and Means Committee recommended, because they're sort of more in the tax finance world than the changes that came out of House Education. And the one of them that directly affects this committee is that we changed the composition of the task force, or we recommended changing it, so that there would be 2 members of this committee, Senate Finance, 2 members of Senate Education, 2 members of House Ways and Means, and 2 members of House Education, appointed by the Speaker and the Committee on Committees, respectively.
The task force on the weighting?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So there had been Secretary of Education and the State Board Chair had been on there, and we wanted to have it be a legislative committee. It's going to be the legislature is going to have to make the decision, and so we changed that. So that does directly affect your committee, obviously.
Yes.
So I can talk more about that if you want me to, but that it doesn't affect tax rates, obviously. We did
just our summer.
Just your summer, yeah. And you have fewer people to choose from than we do.
Yes.
We did add in some language about, which is not that much different than the way it came from the Senate, I think. For the task force to look at, to consider how to integrate the weighting calculations with Vermont's equalized pupil calculations, excess spending threshold, and the yield calculations. But that sort of understanding that if we change weights, what we're doing is changing tax rates. And so looking at it from the tax rate perspective rather than just the question about resources, which is what we're really driving to. So we also, there are a couple other changes in the formula, which I'm happy to talk about, but I don't think is maybe of much interest.
Yeah, we did not touch that one.
Yeah. We did also There's some, well, in terms of the way the tax rate is set, there's some strange things in the way weights are applied. Some are multiplied and some are added. And I'm looking at Brad nodding his head. There wasn't much explanation for why they happen that way. And of course, the impacts are different depending on when you multiply and when you add. So we asked to have the task force look at that and maybe try to make sense out of it. Because
I heard the original was done by a legislative task force. Are you still you want us to do the
well,
next?
I was not on it, so
Who was I?
you know, we've had things added to this. You know, the preschool weights, for example, and the secondary school weights got adjusted quite a few years ago. And I don't think there's ever been sort of a step back and saying, is this the formula that makes sense? So those things do affect tax rates. I'm going through the side by side, so I'm trying not to miss things. One of the other things that we had that I think was sort of in the version that came from the Senate, but we changed it a bit, was to look at the interaction between the recommended weights and our basic funding formula, Act 60 and Act 68, but also Act 46, because the study was done as Act 46 was being implemented, and for districts that were impacted either voluntarily or not voluntarily, in case of my town, the interaction is actually something we should understand. And so that is another thing that the task force is going to look at. One of the areas that we added that's new is understanding that when we change tax rates with the weight calculation, if everything else stays the same, we don't do anything else, the impact is felt entirely on homestead rates, on residential rates. And so we added something for the task force to look at ways to mitigate the impacts on residential property tax rates and consider tax rate equity between districts. And so the House Education Committee took out the reference to the Tax Commission study. We didn't put it back in, but we added this language because I think it gets to the same issue about who, if we're adding new resources to the system, who do we want to have pay for it? And that's very, very much a tax issue. So that's new in the bill.
Excuse me, Representative Ansel, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you tell me which section that is in the bill? Because I completely agree. I'm glad that you touched on that, because the interaction is important, but I'm trying to find the language. I don't have the side by side.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's in, if you look at the powers and duties, I don't have the section number in front of me sitting here. But there's a list of powers and duties that the task force is supposed to perform. Some are recommend, some are consider. Our new language is in 9 and 10.
It's section 2, subsection C.
Thank you. Thanks.
In 9 and 10.
Yeah, so 9 I'm sorry, it's in 8 and 9. I'll get to 10. 8 we rewrote. That's the interaction. 9 is recommend ways to mitigate the impacts on residential property tax rates. So that's our new recommended language.
Okay, I must be looking at the wrong draft because there's not a 9 in mine. So I'll just keep finding. I'll keep finding a different draft. Thank you.
It took me an hour to find the side by side that reflected the work that our committee did. So,
yeah, I just tried to click on the link to the side by side, and the link is dead now. So I don't know where it is.
It's like 2 pages.
This is draft 4.1. That's
4.1. Okay, thank you, Brad.
Okay.
And it is on Ways and Means website.
Yeah, the draft is on the website. The side by side wasn't. So the number 10 we also added, and that is directly in the jurisdiction of this committee, and that's recommend whether to modify, retain, or repeal the excess spending threshold. And that leads me into this discussion about the excess spending threshold. Before I do that, let me just see if there's anything else that I should touch on.
So you
here.
didn't remove the
No,
excess spending
did.
threshold? You did.
We suspended it for 2 years.
Okay,
We didn't repeal it, but we suspended it
Okay.
for 2 years. And that's at the very end of the bill. And I'm going through the side by side. So if it's all right, I'll talk about
Okay.
it. And I get a little further along here. We did change the staffing for the task force, so it's a joint fiscal office, and said that the task force will have technical support from the Agency of Education, which we're hoping is Brad James, and the Department of Taxes, and the Joint Fiscal Office. So those are the folks that we typically depend on for this work. So I assume that's who the task force is going to need. There is a simulator in the bill that I couldn't really explain to you. That came out of House Education. So you'd have to ask them. I could do my best if you wanted me to.
No, it's not in our jurisdiction either.
Oh, good. And then the excess spending moratorium. And what we did is we suspended the excess spending penalty for 2 years for the fiscal year that is going to start this July 1. Those budgets have already been adopted. So if there is any effect on spending decisions by virtue of the penalty, those have already happened. But the tax consequences have not happened. Those would happen as bills go out in July, hopefully in July. And then we also did the same thing for fiscal 23. In that case, if you believe that excess spending penalty pushes budgets lower, and it may, if for fiscal 23, we've taken that break off for fiscal 23. And the thinking on it it really comes from the thinking for doing the suspension, the short-term moratorium on it, is that there is so much going on in school districts now with the pandemic, with the federal aid, with the anticipation of the implementation of different weighting structure, that it just felt like having the excess spending penalty also in the mix was frankly probably more than school boards needed or could deal with. And we looked at the districts that are impacted. They're not wealthy districts. Some of them are wealthy districts, but there are a lot of districts that have a number of low-income students, and I can look at Hardwick, which is a neighboring district to me. It's not a high-income town, and so there's a mix. There's 17 or so districts that are impacted. Of that 17, I think 10, or I think it's 10 that have a higher concentration of low-income kids. 7 who don't. So it's not I think a lot of people tended to think that if you're high spending, you're wealthy, and that's not true. We felt it made sense to give people some breathing room as we work through all these uncertainties. The other issue, the question about should we retain it at all? What happens is that we have made we've done 2 things. One, we anchored it a few years ago, which made the impact of it more extreme and more quick. And we've also created all these exemptions. Some are exempt entirely, some certain kinds of spending are exempt. And it just feels as though maybe it's not the tool that we once thought it was, and that we ought to step back and see whether it's the best way to keep a break on spending and create that link between spending and decisions and tax rates. So we want to take our foot off the accelerator for a couple of years, give ourselves a chance to evaluate it, and then come back and see whether it's the tool that we want to continue with.
Okay. Committee, any questions at this
I-
point?
If I could add one other thing, just in terms of timing, this happened, I don't remember what day we voted the bill out, but Tuesday. So we didn't have this amendment in front of us until Tuesday. So it came that we'd been talking around about excess spending for a long time, but the amendment was quick.
Okay.
Happened
Was
quick.
that amended on the floor?
No, got amended.
No,
It's still in,
it's-
it was in committee. Yeah.
It was in committee. Okay. All right. Any questions here? Senator Hardy.
This, thank you, Representative Ansel. That's very helpful. This may be a question more for Brad, but I guess I'll ask it of you in case you have anything to add. The excess spending threshold for this year, as you pointed out, is not going to have as big of an impact because budgets have already been voted, the moratorium. But did you talk about the potential impact for next year? I mean, I guess you sort of said it depends on if you think it's how effective it is, but is there a fiscal note? Because I'm looking at the actual fiscal note and there's no real number in there.
I think one of the reasons we did talk about it, one of the reasons it's so hard is we've got all this federal money coming in. And so depending on what districts do with it, if they put it in a reserve and they apply it to their budgets next year, it's going to be easy for everybody to stay lower with or without the penalty. There's just so much going on,
Right.
both in the way schools are operating and the way they're being funded at the moment. And some of the money, as you know, goes directly to the schools. Some sort of touches briefly at the state level and then goes to the schools. So there's just so much happening, and then the difference in the way schools have to operate as well. So we did talk about it, but we didn't come to any conclusion about it.
Okay. And then another sort of broader question about the language in general. You know, I absolutely think that the focus of this committee needs to be about the weights, but as I was talking to one of my colleagues this morning, once you start looking at our school funding formula, it's kind of like renovating an old house. You're going to rip up the floorboards and find something you didn't expect. Do you feel like the language in this would give this task force the leeway to fix the rot under the floorboards if they find it? Kind of analogy.
It's a great analogy. I do. And I also think the fact that the people who are going to be on the task force are the people who've been working on the bill and have been part of all these discussions. It's going to happen this summer and fall. I trust people to come in with a product that actually holds together and will work, and not, if some people think it needs to be done in isolation, some people think it needs to be a broader discussion. I trust these 8 people to sort that out.
Okay. And
I think there's room in
there's
this.
room in the language because it is narrowed from the language that the Senate sent over, but it still seems to include most of the same issues. The one thing that was removed is the tuitioning issue, at which I do think will have to be addressed because those tuition rates are dependent on per pupil spending, which will be impacted. So that was the one thing I saw removed that I thought, well, maybe we need that in there. But if you feel like the language is flexible enough that this committee could address that if they need to, then I'm comfortable with it. But
yeah, I think it does, because I think when you talk about going back through all these various sections, but so yes, I won't make you spend all your time, but as I come through it. But yes, there's enough broad language that deals with tax rates generally that I think the task force isn't gonna, those 8 people aren't gonna sit there and say, I know I should be dealing with tuition, but we weren't allowed to.
Yeah,
I just don't see that happening.
Okay.
And that's
The
because,
legislative task force, it's gonna do what it's gonna do.
right. And we've got good staff. I like the way we've designed it. I think it's good that I feel better that it's entirely legislative. I think that makes it less complicated. Joint fiscal is going to convene the first meeting, which I think is what we typically do.
Mhm.
So I feel that there's enough tools and enough room to do the job right.
Okay. The June 1st deadline for the first meeting is a little tight on the 8 people who might be on that task force, given that but I understand the urgency. I have a question for Brad, but I'll wait for till.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna get
Thank you.
Brad. Have we got any more questions for Representative Ansel? Not, we can let her get back to her committee, which presently is a lot more bills than our committee does.
We just got rid of cannabis, so we're one down.
Oh, good.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. This helps. Okay, Senator Pearson is joining us. Brad, I know you've got stuff, and I trust faith that we're still trying to get to Mark Peralt to see what kind of a possible impact that has. But I guess we were told you could tell us what towns we're looking at. I know excess spending has been an issue. There are some wealthy towns that spend what they want to spend. And then there are some really small schools where, because they have so few students, anything above their fixed cost almost throws them into excess spending. So it's been an issue for a while, and probably one we should look at.
Okay, so just for the record, Brad James, Agency of Education, I did send Faith a list of districts that had exceeded the excess spending threshold for the years FY15 through FY21. I have not done the calculations yet for
Okay.
FY22 because we're in the process of collecting their budgets at the moment. I did send information to JFO and Brianna, did a quick sort of a back of the envelope calculation based on preliminary budget data, looking to see what districts were over the excess spending threshold. I don't have that one handy with me right away, but I did send Faith the one that I've got. And while I'm on JFO, quickly channeling my inner JFO, after being on Ways and Means with Mark and Brianna the other day, Mark had said that he thought that this current year, FY21, if we remove the excess spending threshold, the impact of the ed fund would be about $1 million less of tax revenue coming in. And Brianna did a kind of again, based on preliminary budget data, so it's not an official number, number for FY22 this coming year, based on what we've seen, what we've been told, of about $1.4 million. That's about the amount of becoming less. So,
Mark, can you walk us through are these all the schools that got hit with excess spending?
so you're looking at this sheet now, correct?
The one, yeah, the one with all
Yes.
the pretty colors, yeah.
Yeah. So the colors mean something to me. So I don't have to go back for who I'm looking
That's,
at.
but I'm having trouble figuring it out. So
So
are these all the schools that pay excess spending?
these are not schools; these are school districts. Just to be
School
clear.
districts, okay,
I know,
that's
I know
right.
you know that, but it's just just making sure that we're speaking the same language here. And the answer is yes. And so what we're looking at is showing you who's exceeding the threshold in each of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, 7 fiscal years, from FY15 through FY21. So if you look at the very first one, which is Virgins, you'll see that they exceeded the threshold in FY17 by $493 per pupil. Okay, that's how we're reading this. Then the following year, Virgins is grayed out. It says NA. That's because they merged, and they're actually part of Addison Northwest, which exceeded it by a little bit in FY21, this current year, by almost $52. That's how you kind of would read this this chart. All right. And I put it together this way simply because when I was initially asked, people wanted to know what it was over time. And so I just threw together a number of fiscal years. So you're just kind of looking over. So if you want to see who's in it in FY21, you would just look in FY21, you would see that Addison Northwest is, you would see that Peacham is, you would see that Thetford is, Hazen Union High School District, West River Modified Union Education District, and then Bellows Falls Union High School District, Twin Valley Unified School District, and Heartland School District. So we have 9. That's what there are 9 districts that are exceeded it this current year.
Okay.
I know this is the way I think. I'm sorry.
No, I like it, Brad.
I knew, Senator Hardy, I knew you would.
And those
You and I
9
think too
districts,
closely alike, I think.
I know, our brains.
Now, this
Those-
once explained, this is easy to follow. Okay.
Those 9 districts, it's 1.4 million is the estimate for FY22.
No, it's
No.
a different that you can see one of the things you can see in this how it shifts between districts from year to year to year. Some districts are in there for a few years running, then they're gone. Others are in there for a long time. The FY22, I have not really looked at that, and I know Brianna sent it to me, and I looked at it very quickly, but I don't recall what districts were estimated to be in there based on the preliminary data we have. But for these 9 districts that we have here for FY21, Mark had said the estimate was roughly around $1 million. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We've already exempted capital expenditures.
Yes.
And do we know how many, I'm looking at how many of these schools were capital expenditures? Or not?
I can tell you, it'll take me a minute, but I can tell you, generally speaking, there's like, at this point, I think there may be 11 allowable exclusions for the excess spending threshold, which is what Representative Ansel is referring to, that they can't keep getting added on. Of those 11, probably 4 or 5 are probably related to some type of capital spending. And then the rest are kind of picked out in, minor things, or minor things like tuition and things like that. Let me see what I have open here. There we go. It's on the wrong screen. It's over here hiding you guys. Hang on a second. I'm not very good with 2 screens, but here I am at work, so I have 2 screens. So let me just, if you'll bear with me for a moment.
Yeah.
And I will look at who we've got here, who's on this. If I do it a different way. I think it's probably easier for me to scroll down. Addison Northwest, I'll just go down the list. Addison Northwest is in there largely because of capital debt or some type of construction project. Peacham, I don't have any exclusions for them. So I'm not sure why they're in there. They just may be spending high. They do tuition their kids.
It may just be a very small school too.
It's also a smaller district, right? And you can see they've been in there for a couple of years. While I'm looking at this thing, FY17 was a different year. That was what would have been called allowable growth. And to be perfectly honest, I can't remember how it worked off the top of my head. But you'll note that there are 18 districts in there in FY18. I have a note that I found when I found this chart. I don't remember what the results were, but it said that in FY17, of those 18 districts, 14 of them were in there because of the allowable growth calculation. They would not have been in there in the normal calculation. So only 4 would have been there. But Peacham's in there that year. I'm not sure why Peacham's there. It could be because they're small. They were out for a couple of years and they're back in again in 21. Thetford, I know, has some offsetting capital construction costs. So they also send their kids to Hanover sometimes, if I recall correctly. And Hanover is very expensive.
That's tuition.
You jump down to Hazen. Hazen doesn't have any capital offset, so it's possible they had some that was not approved from preliminary approval, which is what allows them to be excluded. But I don't know that.
Okay.
And Marlboro, that's a big one for Marlboro. They are fairly small, fairly isolated.
Yeah.
And I don't have any exclusions at all listed for them whatsoever, of the allowable exclusions.
And they haven't merged either, have
They
they?
have not merged. No, they did not
No,
have
I
to
know they
merge.
were not happy with merging.
They were not. That's true. They did not.
I have a lot of emails.
I think we all do from a lot of people. West River, I'm not sure why they're so high. I know that they've been historically high, but I don't know why they're high. They have a significant amount of money in terms of offsetting for capital construction to the tune of about $360,000 in aggregate for this year. But that's not bringing them down to below the threshold by any means, because they're significantly higher. Bellows Falls, no, they're not showing any capital improvement or capital offsets, and I don't recall hearing them doing any construction projects down there, so I'm not certain why they're high.
Okay.
Then Twin Valley just seems to be historically high. They do have a significant amount of money in terms of offsets for capital costs, but they're high. If I recall correctly, they had quite a few issues with their building, and not everything was allowable. But I'm not sure that's the sole reason why they're high. Again, these are questions I don't really know because I have not talked to the business managers to ask them. And then the last one is Heartland, and that's not a huge amount. I'm sure they're not happy about it, but I don't know. They're not showing any capital offsets either, exclusions. So my guess is that it's probably not that.
The exclusion would help some, but not all of these districts.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's $1 million.
Yep.
Give or
In
take.
terms of tax revenue, right?
Okay. So Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I mean, just a comment, and then I do have a question for Brad. The capital construction thing, there are some districts that are sort of waiting for doing these projects to see if this capital construction exemption goes through. I know one of my districts is, for example. So the list of current ones would change with if we pass that, if that exemption passes.
Yes.
Because they would take advantage of the exemption, is my
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
But my question, this is helpful, Brad. The question I had that I alluded to when I was talking to Representative Ansel is the language in the version that passed by the House or Ways and Means, whatever it is, that in the duties or whatever, and it references, I'm trying to find it. It's number 3, for the purpose of calculating equalized pupils,
Okay.
recommended age ranges to be included for how to define a person from an economically deprived background. And then it mentions some federal law and a citation in state law. What is all that about?
A long involved conversation.
Yeah.
So what currently happens for the equalized pupil calculation, the way that students from a economically disadvantaged background, poverty for simplistic terms for me, background are determined, is we get information from DCF, and the way it's written in statute, it's students living with family units, the students are ages 6 through 17, living with family units that are receiving nutritional benefits, so 3 squares Vermont. And so there was a lot of question about why these numbers were so low with the pandemic hitting. And part of the reason is because of when the counts are taken, as of what date, and they're comparing to who's been applying for the 3 squares Vermont. A lot of this was new information to me too. And so what people in the school district were seeing was they were seeing increased demand on their free and reduced lunches, or their lunches and their summer food programs that were being funded by the federal folks. And I don't know what those criteria were in order to be eligible for those, but they were seeing a significantly increased demand. So they are presuming the poverty count should be going up also significantly. The numbers that I use for the poverty counts are I receive them twice a year. I receive them on December 1, or pardon me, not December. Yeah, I receive them on July 1 and December 1. And then I use 4 counts because it tells to smooth it out. That, paraphrasing the language and statute. So we use 4 counts. So really what I was using a count from December of 2019, then a count from July of 19, and a count from December of 18, plus July of 20. So there's really only 1/4 of the pandemic results in there. And so people thought the numbers were way too low. As the numbers have come in, when I saw them in December, we were talking in Ways and Means, and I think Hal said too, the numbers have gone back up somewhat for the December 1 count, but they're not being reflected. So that was a lot of the consternation. Then people started questioning the fact, are these numbers accurate? Are they too low? How do we check? I can't check. I do not have the DCF information. The DCF information comes from when people are applying for 3 Squares Vermont, they're filling out forms, put it in the data for all the people in that family unit are put into the database, and birth dates are put in there. So the question had also been not only what are those data representing, but also can you do different years? The answer to that latter question, can you do different age range, is yes, because they have the information in there. It's just that statute says 6 through 17 at the moment, but that could obviously be changed. Part of that discussion came about because there was a feeling that a lot of families with the younger children had more poverty, and sometimes they grow out of it, and those numbers were not being captured in the grade range that's in statute right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then this segued into a broader conversation as to other poverty counts, because a lot of people were thinking that the equalized pupil count uses free and reduced lunch counts. It does not.
Right.
And that's what people were comparing. They were comparing the free and reduced lunch counts to these numbers that I had put out there for people, which were a 2-year average. So that in turn got everything riled up. Then the conversation turned to the federal money coming in, because that is based on Title I dollars, on the allocation of Title I dollars between the supervisor units, what the federal folks call LEAs for Vermont. They use an entirely different count, and they use the numbers that are estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau, the SAPE or SAPE. I'm not sure how the acronym is pronounced, but it's a small area income and poverty estimates, and those numbers are truly estimates. They're not based on any actual, they're estimates from lots of different data that come in that U.S. Census uses, and they adjust them each year. And as I looked into it, I found out they might adjust their methodology from year to year too, slightly. So it's like my head went.
Wow.
You did ask, Senator.
No, this is awesome. I love this stuff. So this language.
Okay, but our next witnesses are coming in.
I know. I'll just end here, and then Brad and I can geek out some other time. This language, though, is meant to try to wade into those weeds. Is that?
That's exactly what it is. That was a long, involved explanation. I apologize. I get carried away sometimes. But that's exactly what it is. It's for the task force to look at these different sources and make some type of recommendation.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you.
So Mark Peralt has joined us. And Mark, we're just looking for this 2-year moratorium on excess spending penalty. Brad has told us what he remembered you're saying, but do you want to say it for yourself? Because we knew you were tied up down in Senate Ed.
Right. So it'll be a moratorium that will be put in place for 2 years, FY22 and FY23. Schools have already set their budgets for FY22, so it won't have an effect on where they set their budgets. And we estimated, or Brianna estimated, the cost of it, the gross homestead property taxes would be reduced by about $1.4 million in FY22. And that will be somewhat offset in FY23 by a slightly lower property tax credit. But for the bottom line in FY22, it's $1.4 million. And we can't do much of a projection for FY23 because we don't know what school spending is and we don't have any of the other underlying data that we need to do the analysis. But and then I think there's a provision in S13 or one other bill for them to take a look at the task force to take a look at the excess spending penalty going beyond FY23.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty detailed. Okay, any questions for Mark? Thank you.
Hey,
Committee, we're going to move on to
Do we need to take a vote on this one?
we don't have this bill.
Oh, right. Okay.
This right now is still in the House. It's coming back. So at some point, we will have to advise House Ed on, not House Ed, Senate Ed on their response to whatever comes to them. And it doesn't look, considering that we have 18 or 15 something million on the bottom line, this one does not look, extraordinarily expensive or undoable for 2 years. But I will look to the committee and we can talk about that. It has been an issue because you get some wealthy towns that are going to do, and then you've got some poor towns that every time they move, they seem to get nailed. So think about it and we will have a discussion before we make a recommendation. We've got a couple bills we'll still need to get out next week. Watch your emails because it is hurry up and wait time. As bills get referred to us, we'll have to meet. As bills come back, we'll have to meet. It's my intent, I think, if once we get through today, we will have gotten the bills that we're going to get out. And we'll see where they go. We're going to start with H289, which is the professional occupations regulated by the Office of Professional Regulations. And the bulk, there's one fee change, but then we get into martial arts, MMA, mixed martial arts, which is new for us. And there seems to be a lot of taxes and expenditures and just we're trying to get our head around that. And Dan, you're here from the fiscal office. Do you have a fiscal note or there was also a question about how is it decided if an event needs a one-time event tax or if it needs tax fee, I'm not sure what, every day? On what criteria? We're a little nervous about just saying, well, they can decide, and it might just be we don't like you. So, so Dan, have you got any kind of a fiscal note on this, or?
Yes, I have provided you with the fiscal note. For the record, Dan Dickerson, Joint Fiscal. I think, though, that the question that you just asked is probably a better question for Lauren Hibbert, who's also here.
Okay, so fiscal note.
So there were, I touched on two items that are in H289 that I believe have at least some sort of, well, both have really minor impacts, but I wanted to bring them up. The first pertains to the well drillers. This was in the underlying bill as it came over from the House. Basically what it does is it moves the regulation of well drillers from the Department of Environmental Conservation to the Office of Professional Regulation. The fee—
I thought we had already done that, but maybe that's a bill that didn't make it through.
It could be that that was in a different bill. I wouldn't honestly be able to tell you.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of watching Lauren. She can tell us when we get there, but I do remember drillers.
Yeah, currently, under the DEC regulation, they pay an annual fee of $140 for the license, and the fee revenue goes into the Environmental Permit Fund to fund their general operations. And then I noted in the fiscal note in FY20, there were 72 well drillers licensed in Vermont. And I pulled this from the 2021 executive branch fee report. In 21, they estimated that there were going to be fewer, but I used the FY20 number. And so in 20, they paid, those 72 licensees paid about 10,000 in licensing fees. So not a huge amount of money. When the regulation moves over to OPR, well drillers will be subject to the sort of the generic catch-all fees that fall under the advisor profession part of their regulatory framework. And so that would be a $100 initial licensing fee and a $240 biennial renewal. So the amount of fees that they would pay over a 2-year period will be reduced by about $40. And then the revenues will now be deposited in the professional regulatory fee fund. So it's a small change in revenue, a downward change, and then the revenue shifts from one department to another. So it's pretty minor. And then the mixed martial arts, this is slightly more nuanced. So hopefully I won't misstep, but if I do, I'm sure Lauren will correct me. But my understanding is that, under current law, there's a regulation concerning boxers, and this regulation is in 31 VSA Chapter 21. The regulations are under the purview of OPR. H289 proposes to move the existing boxing regulations to 26 VSA, and then within that chapter there would be 2 subchapters, one pertaining to boxers, which I think would be completely unchanged from the way it currently is in law, and then there would be a new subchapter of law pertaining to mixed martial arts. I think it'll pretty closely parallel the boxers, but there are some differences, and I touched on at least the fee differences in the fiscal note. Well, actually I didn't, sorry. I'll walk you through the fee differences in the fiscal note. The fees for promoters will be the same as they are for boxers. The fees for contestants will be different. Currently a boxer would pay a biennial $25 fee, and in this bill, a mixed martial artist would pay a $25 annual fee. Participants would be unchanged between boxers and MMA. And then this event license is new, and it's $250. And I think Lauren can speak to, I guess, how that's charged.
Yeah, because I'd like to know what, just to be a contestant in Vermont, you have to pay an annual fee. If you're a resident of New Hampshire, you come up here to take part in an event, then you have to pay an annual fee, even though you may not show up here for 5 years. I'm trying to figure that out. And I'll take these are for Lauren. But a contestant and a participant also, I leave her. So you can walk us through the fiscal, but
Okay.
I'm just putting these out so she'll have them.
And just to backtrack, in the definitions for the current statute relating to boxing, at least to some extent, MMA is captured under that current law. And so I think under current law, if you were going to participate in an MMA match in Vermont, you should be subject to the existing contestant fee. But then to move on to, I guess, the end of the fiscal note, I just noted that the OPR has collected very little revenue from, well, there haven't been licensees, or at least a large number, or even really any significant number over at least the past 5 years. I looked back in the vision system to FY16, and in that 5-year period, they've only collected, I think it was $1,750 total, and $1,500 of that was just collected recently for, I think what Lauren said was a provisional promoter license. So it's really been, the activity has really been non-existent, or at least the activity that's flowed through OPR. I did, read some past news articles, I think from last year, of some non-sanctioned events that were taking place during the pandemic, but I won't go into that other than noting it. So given that there isn't a whole lot of activity now, I don't foresee that there'll be a whole lot of activity going forward. And I just noted that, if there's any revenue, it's probably going to be less than 5,000, if it's even close to that. And then there is this 5% event tax established. I think it's slightly different from the tax applied to boxing events. I think the 5% tax on boxing events is, the proceeds less the taxes. And I think this one is the proceeds less the cost to put on the event, and then less the taxes. But, like I said before, I don't think that OPR has collected any revenue from, that is a really nice cat in Senator McDonald's image.
Mark, your cat is getting a really good screenshot here, a close-up.
Sorry, I got distracted really easily. I don't think that
the
OPR
cat
has collected
been
anything
bouncing
from
in
this
and out.
tax.
I've noticed him before.
It's the ghost
Oh,
cat.
that cat is a ham.
So like I said, the OPR hasn't collected any revenue from this tax on boxing matches, at least since FY16. And then just to make one more statement pertaining to the bill, for the MMAs, the fees and tax proceeds would go to the Professional Regulatory Fee Fund, just as they do for the boxing proceeds. And that is all I have.
Okay, any questions for Dan at this point? All right. So Lauren, I guess one of the questions is why, since we don't seem to be doing much, and there was the concern about who makes the decision and on what criteria, that whether or not you need a daily license or an event. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Director of the Office of Professional Regulation. The why of this section is exactly what Dan Dickerson just referred to, which was the unlicensed practice of MMA during COVID. We really became aware as an office of a set of scenarios that we were very uncomfortable with. I heard from previous testimony in this committee that there was questions about why a sunrise report was not done. And again, it goes back to the fact that we have been poorly regulating MMA. MMA was added as a regulated practice to the boxing chapter in Title 31 in 2011. And it was added, I think probably with the best intent. I think from my legislative review, it looked like it was added at the request of OPR, but the request was not fully fleshed out. I think we thought that we could do rulemaking around the profession. We have failed to do rulemaking around the profession. And so when we were forced to encounter somebody who was unlicensed, holding MMA fighting, of course, with some escalating factors of COVID and children, which were both concerning and needed immediate redress. But when we were forced with how do we get this person appropriately licensed, we did not have a path. And the path wasn't in Title 31. And we really started to realize that we had this regulatory oversight issue with, we were in the space, but not fully in the space. And that's why we came to Senate Government Operations to ask for this amendment. And why we asked for it mid-session is we were working with stakeholders to flesh out some of the details. We couldn't get that fully completed before the start of the session. So we have worked with some stakeholders around this language. As Dan said, it is based primarily off of the boxing language, but we also looked at some other states that have, almost every other state has some form of MMA regulation. But we looked at particularly New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, I believe, and somewhere in the South, which I forget off the top of my head. But we looked at other states' regulations. The difference between a participant and a contestant is the contestant is the person actually fighting, and the participant is a referee, judge, or I believe the physician. Well, let me look at the definitions. I apologize, I think I'm speaking out of turn. The participant could be a manager, referee, matchmaker, seconds, corners, or judges. So not the physician who would be present. So this really creates a robust structure for these events to happen. There is an appetite for these events to happen. It would be the office's preference and strong recommendation that they happen within a structure, that it's very clear that there should be a physician there. There is a difference between the fee structure from boxing with the event fee, and that's the $250. The rationale for that is we will be inspecting these events, and there will be a cost to that work, that inspection work. And the reason why it is different than boxing is actually a fairly regulated activity by a third-party association, the Golden Gloves Association. MMA is new, it's upcoming, it's a little bit more scrabbly, and we think that it would be appropriate to have some more active oversight there. The section that you were speaking to, Madam Chair, about the separate event fee for each day of the event, that is on page 11, line 6 of the Senate Government Operations Amendment. That, I believe, was modeled after New Jersey, which has that language. If it's a multi-day event, that a fee could be charged, an event fee could be charged for each day. If this committee is uncomfortable with the language, I would recommend that you either take out that whole sentence of the office may charge a separate event fee for each day of the event. If we run into a problem where we feel like we're not garnering enough revenue to cover our expenses, we could come back with that addition. Or you could say that we can charge $250 for each day of the event. So just clarify it, take out the discretion. So either take it out at all together or make it that we will collect the fee for each.
That we will do it for all events.
Exactly, for all events, if they're multi-day, each day is $250. The other thing that I'll say, if you choose to delete it, we did not intend to create ambiguity or confusion there. So I feel comfortable recommending that you delete the sentence because we do have the gate tax, which I don't love that it's called a tax, but it is because I think it is confusing. But we will, but again, it's modeled after the boxing statute, and that's the word that the boxing statutes use, which is why we maintained it. So we will be, if it's a multi-day event, we will presumably get more of the gate tax because it will be there'll be more revenue, we'll get more revenue because it's a multi-day event. So I feel comfortable with the deletion of that sentence if that would make the committee more comfortable. I don't think it would have a large fiscal impact is what I'm saying. And again, all of this is a little bit hypothetical because we have not been fully in this space, and it is with humility that I come saying we haven't been in the space, we need to be in the space. We're concerned about the space, and that's why we brought this amendment to SGO.
Okay. Committee, questions, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Dan, for the fiscal note. I was the one who was like, hey, is there a fiscal note for this thing? You mentioned those events, and I assumed that's why this came about, because that got quite a bit of press in my area of the state. Those events, you referenced it, and my recollection was that it involved children. Does this draft address age requirements? I don't remember that from the other day. Where
Does a contestant must be over the age of majority of 18?
is that in the definition section?
Just one moment. I think it's a separate section. Amarin, do you know offhand?
It is Amarin Abergele, Legislative Counsel. It is in section 6042 age on page 21.
Okay, great.
And that was a specific concern that OPR had, and I know that the Association of Pediatricians also had. They testified in support of this bill.
Great, I see it now. Thank you. That's much appreciated. That's all I have. Thanks for bringing this to our attention.
My somewhat 40-pound grandson in third grade, maybe, does wrestling matches. It's a school, or it may be a rec department. They have tournaments around the state. Is this going to impact them?
It will not. It's very narrowly tailored to be an event where there is a prize, meaning money. And what we've seen anecdotally, or not even anecdotally, what we've seen is money to get in, a prize to the winner, and frequently the sale of alcohol. So those are not the variables for your son's matches or your grandson's matches.
Right. It is something of a family joke because he doesn't look like a wrestler.
Sometimes the best wrestlers are scrappy.
He apparently is, but okay. Amarin.
Thank you. I never know whether to use my yellow Zoom hand or whether to
No,
use my
I
hand.
don't. This is the Senate. We're very physical. You just wave.
Okay. I wanted to add that section 6029 does have exemptions. This is on page 7. So all amateur mixed martial arts events shall be regulated by the office, except for amateur mixed martial arts events conducted by a school, college, or university. And then in addition, below that, you do have OPR having the discretion by rules, according to rules adopted, exempt from the application of these rules, events in which there is minimal or no contact between contestants, for which there is no remuneration for participation, and for which no tickets are sold or admission fees charged. So just to give you the full scope of what's being regulated, there are those limited exemptions.
Okay, committee. Okay, no questions. No questions. The cat is blocking your speaker, Senator.
Speaking.
Okay, if we have no questions, committee, what is your preference? This is the end of the session.
would you like a motion, Madam
I
Chair?
would love a motion unless there's some more questions or amendments.
I would move that we support the Senate Government Operations Committee draft. Is it 1.5 for H289? Is that correct, Ameren?
That is correct. I had a question before there's a
Oh,
motion. I wasn't sure where
yes.
the committee landed on the multi-day event fee. You're okay with the OPR may?
Or do you want to
Or
just
do you
take
want
that
shall?
out?
It could just say shall, and then they just shall do a fee for each day of an event if it's a multi-day event. Or you could remove it entirely or leave it as it is, which gives OPR the discretion.
Lauren,
Just wanted to add that if this committee does make an amendment, I have a request to in the title, I'm not being very clear, I apologize. In Title 31, in the definitions for boxing, there's a few items that are stragglers of our bad inclusion of MMA. And if you did make an amendment, Ameren and I recognize this problem. Really, Ameren and Dan recognized the problem and brought it to OPR. So if you did make an amendment, there's a small deletion of some terms in the boxing statute related to MMA that I would ask that you.
that gets kind of hard to frame in a motion without giving you kind of permission to do almost anything. Senator Pearson, can you?
Well, I'm just wondering, Lauren, if you've considered the timing, the moment we make a change. Well, let me back this up. Has the Senate made changes more broadly, so it's already going back to be considered?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
major thing by Senate GovOps.
And so are you asking, would you like us to make more clarity, or you wouldn't?
So the boxing statute, again, has this inclusion of MMA awkwardly. So I will need that to be removed at some point in the future. It either could be now through this committee, you would be one vehicle, or next year in the OPR bill, we could do cleanup. It's not a showstopper, but it is something that has come to the attention of Ledge Council and the office.
Okay. Senator Hardy and then Senator Gray.
I was just going to suggest if Ameren can quickly draft something that would clean this up and then change the may to a shall and bring it to us, we could vote it after we see the language today, and then we'd be done with it. Because we're going to take this up on the floor anyway, so it could be a floor amendment from the committee.
I did draft some language already in anticipation of this maybe being taken up at some point.
Good. Can you share that with us?
I can. Let me, would the easiest thing be to send it to your committee assistant and have it emailed and posted?
We could send it to Faith, or Faith can make you, I believe, a co-host if you have the ability to share it from where you are.
I can certainly share it from where I am.
Okay, so I will be amazed if Faith has not already made you a co-host or given you the whatever ability she needs to do.
Madam Chair, if I may, you had asked about well drillers and whether you had seen it before. And I forgot to answer that question when I was speaking before.
That's all right.
We have not addressed well drillers in previous sessions, but we have transferred other professions from DEC to OPR, including wastewater and treatment operators, wastewater
Okay,
treatment.
no, well drillers is a very distinct category. And and it may not have gone through, but I do remember a discussion about well drillers.
We did write a report that we filed last year. It got a bit varied appropriately by COVID, but it was on licensure streamlining throughout the state. And that report did recommend moving well drillers. So
Okay,
that
maybe
was it.
that's, because I have an image of well drillers highlighted. Okay. All right, so here is, and these are technical cleanups, right?
Yes, so what you are looking at right now would add a section 15A to H289, which is in the boxing, where we're moving the boxing chapter into a chapter with mixed martial arts. So this would add a section 15A, and specifically we're looking at the definitions section from the boxing chapter in Title 31. So you'll see that the end of this first paragraph has kickboxing, martial arts, and mixed martial arts as defined in this section shall be considered matches for the purpose of this chapter. And then you will also see on this second page that there are a kickboxing definition, a martial arts definition, and a mixed martial arts definition. And
They're
these
all
are
coming
the,
out because they're in the next mixed martial arts section.
that's correct. And having them stay in the boxing chapter makes it appear that there is some regulation under the boxing chapter of mixed martial arts. So, and these are the only references to mixed martial arts in the boxing chapter is in this definitions section.
Okay.
And that is exactly why OPR had a problem.
Committee, questions on this? We're removing references to any form of martial arts in the boxing chapter and moving them into the mixed martial arts chapter that we are about to vote on. So I would need a motion to amend.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
my only question is, are we also going to include the changing the may to the shall? I don't have strong feelings about it. I don't care, but I just wanted to make sure before I make a motion which one we're doing.
Committee, what is your preference? I think, Amron, we can take this down and then I can see who's way. Senator Pearson.
My sense is these matches are 1 day or possibly 2 days. So I'm comfortable as it is now. Am I correct, Amron, that OPR has some flexibility and they could figure out exactly what they need?
Presently, the language says that they may charge a separate event fee for each day of an event, and then it does require the office to adopt rules to outline the performance of its duties under this subchapter.
Okay, comfortable with that? Okay, so then the motion we need is to amend
Government Ops proposal amendment with the amendment as follows.
as well, and what I'm looking for, Amron, is unless Senator Hardy has it, the draft and the number that we're amending.
We're amending draft number 1.5 of H289 with
Okay.
the amendment that Cameron just put on the screen.
Okay.
I will move that.
Okay, so Senator Hardy has moved that we amend with, and I don't have the number, but the removing reference to martial arts from the boxing chapter, and it's all going in the martial arts chapter. Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, that carries. I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're all here, so that's 700. And then we need a motion to approve as amended.
I move to approve draft number 1.5 H289 as amended by this committee.
Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Oh, say no. Hearing no opposition, that carries 700. Who would like to report this?
I'm happy to do it.
Okay, I was thinking of you. That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Some of us have others. All right, well, good.
Thank you
One
very much
down.
for your time.
Thank you, Lauren and Ameren. And
Ameren,
we're
can you
going-
send me the draft so I can send it to the secretary?
Yes.
Thank you.
now we are going on to the last bill, I believe that we're going to get out. And then tomorrow we're going back to the corporate tax discussion and just start working our way through what the problem was and where it's going. Senator Pearson.
Madam Chair, just to update you and committee, and thank you again for moving the miscellaneous energy yesterday. It's a good deal. We had an extra day because it got referred to appropriates today because of per diems, and actually we saved them money in this bill. So anyway, they did advance it on a riveting 5-0-2 vote earlier while I missed the beginning. So thanks for that, and it'll be on notice tomorrow.
Okay.
Wait, which bill was that, Chris? The
The miscellaneous 431, the miscellaneous bill we voted out yesterday.
Energy.
Got it.
Yeah.
The painful energy bill. Got it. Thank you.
Yes,
The
and
smooth-
I keep
the
getting
smooth-
pop-up emails saying support the standard offer, which we may well do once we have time to take it up.
I prefer to think of it as a smooth consensus bill, Senator Hardy.
Yes.
We could adjust the way we.
Okay.
phrase it.
Yes. Let's rewrite history. Absolutely.
No, let's just look at the end product. That's
Okay.
Did not use the word slogging with this
Just
one.
Just like with H360. All's
Yeah.
good.
Oh, and there are so many moving parts, but we're going back now to 437, which is an act relating to changes that affect the revenue of the state. And Abby is with us and Graham is with us. And parts of this have been attached to S-101, Senator Sirotkin.
Correct.
I know that the other body is very supportive of the mobile home credit, and I believe that's on 101. That there seems to be some concern that the surcharge on high value housing and the property transfer may be a red flag that could get this vetoed. But that was the way that the House chose to replace the money in the ed fund that was being taken out by the machinery and equipment tax changes. I am remembering they are being very conscientious about when something is exempted, another revenue source is being put in its place.
I think that's general fund, Madam Chair.
No, it's a machinery equipment is a sales.
No, that's ed fund. But I thought you were referring to surcharge. Okay.
When it first came over, I was told they were using it to replace money lost by the water tax. I don't know what they're doing. We're going to make our own decisions. But there seems to be more finance bills at play being attached to other bills. The whole exemption for the excess spending is on the waiting study bill. There just seems to be a lot moving around in whole or in part. Senator McDonald, you have a,
I'm confused, Madam Chair. Is the House objecting to the bill that the House passed to us?
no. They're thinking that the administration may object to it.
No, they-
And there are things that
Administration
they,
believes in balanced budgets.
yes,
That's
I
all.
know,
Don't
there
worry
are
about that.
things that they highly value that I think they're trying to protect.
Yeah, they value cutting taxes and not replacing the lost tax revenue. It's
No,
their
they,
value of it. Yeah.
no, they
Yeah.
did replace the value. Okay, the House did. All right, but the concern is how they did it might raise red flags for
No,
some.
I was saying, the administration has a problem with replacing the
Well,
taxes that are cut. Yeah,
maybe.
it's all right. It's okay.
Okay, so Abby, why don't you give us a 500,000 foot just walk through, just so we remember what is, the multiple sections of this bill. And then we will start with our discussion.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel for the record. The first three sections of the bill impose a surcharge of 0.5% on transfers of properties above $1 million. And it requires the Commissioner of Taxes to direct all of that surcharge revenue into the general fund. That's what the next few sections deal with. It's notwithstanding existing statute that would otherwise split the revenues partly to the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund and partly to the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund. That's typically not withstood in the appropriations process. This just makes it clear that this new surcharge entirely would be deposited into the general fund. So that's the first three sections of the bill. The fourth section of the bill does impact the education fund. That's the sales and use tax exemption for manufacturing equipment and machinery. It expands that exemption slightly to capture the full manufacturing process. It moves Vermont from a direct use standard to this broader integrated production process standard. It's called the integrated plant theory. And lastly, the other appropriation made in this bill is for the affordable housing tax credit, where it increases it annually by $250,000, and it dedicates all of that new that new appropriation to the purchase and restoration of manufactured homes. And it's all effective on July 1st of 2021.
Okay. And that will have to go to a proponent.
Yes, with those two appropriations.
Okay.
Sorry, there is really just one appropriation, then there's some foregone revenue with the tax.
Revenue with the other one. Okay. So in that, the surcharge is on residential and business properties, right?
That's correct. So if I may, Madam Chair, there is a potential drafting change that the committee might wish to make. This applies to the languages voted out of the House, and what has been proposed to be amended to S-101 applies to deeded transfers of properties. It does not currently apply as drafted to controlling interests. That was added in a few years ago and applies to
Ski areas where stock traded hands, not cash.
Correct. So it also could apply in the case of an LLC, for example, which often high value secondary homes or high value homes are owned not by individuals, but by an LLC or another form of ownership for different reasons, tax and estate, for example. The way this was drafted, it only applies to transfers by deed. So if the committee did wish for that to be more expansive and capture potentially these high value homes, I do actually have draft language that I could show you that just says the surcharge applies to all properties in excess of 1 million.
Okay, yeah, because just, I can't remember the last time I sold a house for an older person that that the home wasn't in some form of trust.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that if all you have to do is set up an LLC to save this additional percent, that there'd be a lot of LLCs out there set up a month before you put the house on the market. So that's probably a good one to pick up.
Does that change the fiscal note?
So I will let Graham answer that, but my understanding is that, well, I'll let Graham answer. Sorry, Graham.
Okay, great.
Graham Campbell, the Joint Fiscal Office. The fiscal note was made with the assumption that controlling interest would be included. So to the extent the committee is not included, then we.
Does it include the controlling interest statute we passed?
That was passed a couple of years ago, I think in H168 or as part of the overall revenue bill. I can't remember. It's one of those.
Right, does that,
Right, this, does
will the change,
that included in this additional tax?
that's what I'm asking, will it include the controlling interest if you sell
Yeah,
sell by stock or something? Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about here, but the controlling interest language was not put into this surcharge language here. I think that's what Ms. Shepherd is highlighting here, is that right now the language would apply the surcharge to transfers of deed, but it would not apply it to transfers of controlling interest. And I think it's a decision whether they want to add that. I think the only thing I would add is that the fiscal note upon which that I made this was using data that included controlling interest transfers and transfers. So if the committee did not include the controlling interest transfers, then that would probably lower the fiscal note slightly, but not a significant amount.
okay, we're having some trouble hearing you, Graham. You kind of fade in and out, like me. Okay.
I was just saying that the data upon which this fiscal note is based includes transfers of controlling interests and transfers of deeds. And so to the extent that the committee does not or decides that they don't want to include controlling interests as part of the surcharge, then that would probably lower the revenue raised for the surcharge only a relatively modest amount, not a significant.
Senator Sirotkin.
So I'm looking at the fiscal note, or I was, and now I've lost it, but so what this bill does, it does three things, and there's $250,000 helping people buy low-income homes, and then there's almost $2 million raised a year from the property surcharge. And then separate and apart from that, affecting the ed fund is $900,000 for a machinery exemption. So I know you talked about this before, but I'm wondering why, if we do the surcharge at all, which I'm not necessarily a big fan of, why we have to do it at such a high rate.
I don't want to speak for the House. The manufactured homes credit in this ramps up over time. The cost to the state ramps up $250,000 per year until fiscal year 26. And at that point, it levels off. So once it's fully phased in, and remember these are 5-year credits, once they're all stacked on top of each other, the total cost to the state of the new credits in this bill is $1.25 million. And so as the property transfer tax is roughly about $2 million, and by fiscal year 26, the manufactured homes credits about 1.25. In the long run, this bill in the general fund only raises about $750,000. So I think the reason why it might be higher or appear sort of off base is that they're trying to make those two revenue sources close.
When it levels off at 1.25 and 26, how much in that year are you projecting for the property transfer tax surcharge to raise?
I'm not projecting that far because we don't have a forecast of the property transfer tax up to fiscal year 26. But I think it's a safe bet it'll be around $2 million.
So how is it possible that even in the final year, oh, I see what you're saying, in the final year, it's going to raise an ongoing, perhaps $750,000 more than we need. And in the years prior to that, it's going to raise several $1 million more than they need. So I asked my question, not only to you, but to the committee, why are we raising the tax so much?
I would ask another question also, and that is, should there be an anticipation that the value of homes sold over time will increase at least by the rate of inflation, if not more?
On the property transfer tax surcharge, the majority of the money here, about 70% of it, comes from commercial properties. And when I say commercial properties, that includes a good chunk of, actual industrial commercial properties, but then about 20% of it comes from second homes, condos, and then the remaining chunk comes from personal residences. So I don't want to speak to the sort of real estate cycles about whether these increase by inflation every single year. I think Tom Kvedt would say differently. But for this fiscal note, for this estimate, I'm relying upon the property transfer tax data from the tax department, but also what the growth is projected to be in the property transfer tax revenues for the state. And so I think for some properties, inflation, might play a factor, but in the course of 2-3 years on the downside of the housing market, it wouldn't necessarily apply. So I think it just depends on the year.
Are we in the discussion period here?
I've
Madam Chair?
got Senator Pearson and then Senator McDonald. I had Senator Pearson before.
Are we in the discussion period here now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
Thank you. I think my question is probably for Abby, but maybe Senator Sorokin. Is this just, and forgive me if you said this, is this a total duplication of a part of a different bill? I noticed this one came late. It was in rules. So I'm just trying to understand because there's so many moving parts, but
Sure.
well, maybe I'll just ask it this way. Is this language only in this bill, or have we looked at this somewhere else?
So you have not in any other bills, but the House has, the House Ways and Means Committee is proposing to attach the language, part of the language from H 437 onto S 101.
So we may see it somewhere else, but, and then why was this late? And does that suggest some kind of urgency or a strategy, or maybe you can't answer that, but does anybody else have a sense of that?
I don't know why it's late. I know I have enough trouble with 7 of us moving things forward. And how many are there? 11, 12? That moving things through the House takes longer. And this is, again, there's some members that would like to do that business tax because that will help manufacturing and they could use that right now. And since the housing market seems to be booming, a way to replace that money is housing. And I think most members wanted to do the mobile home tax credit because that will help people get into better homes and more efficient homes. But
And-
why it was late, I don't know. I
Okay.
believe, and Senator Sorokin, you can correct me, that the mobile home tax credit is on S-101, and is the manufacturing tax?
No.
Is
No.
not.
No.
It's
So
thirteen.
what else
It's
did
the
they put
surcharge.
on there?
Surcharge is on 101.
The surcharge.
So the
Oh.
surcharge is on 101 and the mobile home tax credit is on 101. The manufacturing exemption is not on 101. And my understanding is that it may be voted out this afternoon. It passed Ways and Means, and it may be voted out in appropriations House appropriations this afternoon. That a hearing this morning that I heard went very well, except for there was some pushback on the surcharge.
And Graham, in terms of, whenever we pass bills like this, after we've passed the budget, I'm always trying to understand if there's an intersection. But in terms of the immediate coming fiscal year, we're considering this bill to be no impact because it sort of covers itself. Is that correct?
No, I'm glad you brought this up. So this bill was passed very close or in tandem with the House budget. So this bill, the revenues in this bill, the budget did rely on these revenues. And so that when it passed the House, so
The House budget.
the House budget, yes. And then the Senate presumably, built upon that House budget.
Well, you can't presume this. We need to know, because if we don't pass it, we need to know if we have to talk to approps about that. So could you be clear on that, please?
Yes, my understanding from Steve Klein is that they are counting on the Senate to raise at least as much money as the House did prior of the bills that passed in the House. So this would be included in that. So they're expecting at least this amount of revenues from this bill. And this was the only revenue bill that had money in it that the budget relied on that passed the House. S-53, all of that came later. And so they didn't really count on that. But this one, they did count on. Is that clear?
The House did. The House did, not the Senate, right?
So no, the Senate did.
I think the Senate did as well, yes.
And that's what I was told. They were raising revenue to at least cover the cost of that tax. Well, the big tax credit, the 1.25 million, is the expansion of the mobile home tax credit. So if we do nothing, there's no expenditure in a bill. I think if we do nothing, we're covered because we aren't increasing the cost. That 1.25 is a tax expenditure. If we do that, I mean, the testimony was they only found the manufacturing when they went in to do an audit because it's so vague. Very few companies understand it. So the real expenditure is the mobile home tax credit and the manufacturing credit, and they are paying for those with the surcharge. Is that? But if we don't do this, if we do nothing, is the budget impacted?
Yes, it is impacted.
Yes.
Yes. If you don't do this bill, then I think you would have to find a way to make up the $1.85 million in this bill that impacts the general fund.
No, if we don't pass the bill at all, so there's no expenditure, there's no expansion, there's no removal of manufacturing equipment, so we don't have any tax expenditures, then do we need, but do we still need to raise revenue if we don't spend any in here? Is this an enclosed bill? If we do nothing, what happens to the budget? And, that may be a Steve or Stephanie question.
I think Steve could provide additional clarity, but I would say that you do need to pass at least the same amount of revenue raised in this bill for the general fund. The education fund, I think, is a different story, but I think for fiscal year 22, the budget did count on the $1.85 million raised in this bill.
Raised by the surcharge on high. Okay. All right.
This- So this is an awkward situation because basically the Appropriations Committee is telling us that we have to pass this tax or some other tax, I guess.
Or something else.
So, Madam Chair, I thought I was next.
So
Yes, you are.
So what I hear is that we got affordable housing problem, and there's a general consensus that the move to make some houses more affordable is going to cost some money. And we've got a situation where we've got expensive houses that are selling quite well. And one of the reasons we have an affordable housing problem is that builders would rather build houses for people that have a lot of money. I mean, that's where the building takes place. And each year that's gone by for the last 20 years, the ability of people to buy homes with the lower income folks has become more and more difficult. And today we have an opportunity to collect a little money at the top end to help pay for housing at the bottom end. That is the problem that's been facing us. People at the bottom end cannot afford to buy houses when the builders build houses for people that can afford to buy several houses. And we often get to the end of these legislative sessions and we start arguing technical things about if this bill passes and that one doesn't, is it going to match up on this fund or that fund or the next fund? And usually the rationale is, well, let's not take any risks. So I would hope that this committee would commit itself to having a balanced taxation program for homes between those that are affordable and those that are very expensive, and see if we could work to achieve that, to solve that problem. So thank you.
Senator, I would agree with your base analysis. However, as a former realtor, we did an analysis, and with the cost of raw materials and the requirements like paved sidewalks, paved streets, underground utilities that most communities have put in, it's impossible to build a house that is affordable to the average Vermonter. And we are putting people in this bill in mobile homes, which are shelter, and some of them are very nice, but they depreciate in value. And so lower income people are being disadvantaged, but the gap is in middle income people, the $250,000, $200,000, $150,000 houses. And we are building those. But a lot of it is material costs.
So, Madam Chair, if you're making an argument for a 3% surcharge on houses for more than
No,
$1
I
million,
am not making an
because I believe
argument.
you've
I am
made
not
a
making an
great
argument
I'll
for
support it.
any. I'm just saying that the cause and effect is that you laid out is a little simplistic. I'm not going to fight the 1%, and I'm not going to fight the mobile homes. I tried after Irene to find a way to put people into lower cost. If we're going to replace mobiles, then it would be better for all people if we put them into a stick-built home, which appreciates, and they will have value in the end of 10 years.
Madam Chair.
Mobile home, they do not.
I'm with you 100%.
All right.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
maybe we can
This is
resolve
not
this
just
easy-
a matter of
this
greedy
easy one.
builders.
while we work on, I agree with you 100%.
No, I just don't like taking groups of people and labeling them with nasty titles like greedy builders
No,
who
I
would prefer to build for rich people.
never used,
Okay, I just,
Madam
no,
Chair,
I don't want to go there. I'm going to go
Madam
to
Chair?
Senator Bray.
I
Yes.
did not use that term. In the
No,
morning, when builders have a line of people in front of their house, their building, and they're waiting to get a house built, the builders pick the ones that have the cash. That doesn't make them greedy, that makes them good business people. That's what goes on today. And I
I'm going to go
I
to
agree with you,
Senator
Madam Chair. Thank you.
Senator Bray.
So my question is two things. One, I'll start with the money question. I don't know where we are grand total at this moment, but $6 billion plus budget. I don't know how it is that finding these dollars to do, for instance, the mobile home expenditure must come out of this revenue source. So I don't really like the sounds as though it's being depicted that, you know, we have this obligation to do this or else we're underfunding something. I don't know why we can't have a conversation about reallocation of funds. And so that otherwise it feels like we're being pushed in a little bit into a false choice. And on the surcharge one, I don't remember, maybe Graham can help me remember the percentage of monies that will come, since it's $1 million plus, then we say that many of these will actually, transactions will be in commercial real estate. And so in that case, do we know the split between residential and commercial? I know you told us, but that feels like a long time ago already.
Yes, I do know that number. I don't know it off the top of my head. A large portion of this, I think it's about 70%, comes from not principal residences.
Right. So, okay. And so then it, yeah. So then who is quote unquote being targeted to help provide this lift to another segment? I'm a little uncomfortable with just saying that commercial real estate transactions should be the principal source of income for a housing, you know, a tax expenditure related to housing for lower income folks. It's like I don't want to pit that one group versus the other, and I don't. So I'm interested in seeing if there's another way to solve this puzzle financially.
I'm also interested, I'm still not sure. I haven't gotten an answer. If we don't do the machinery and equipment, that would go to the ed fund. So it's the 1.25 million a year for the mobile home that is a tax expenditure. So, but if we do, I guess I'm trying to figure out if we don't do anything, how much money is actually spent in the budget? More, if we do nothing, how much is the budget short?
It would be short 1.85 million. That's what this bill raises for the general fund.
Right, it raises 1.85, but it does a tax expenditure of 1.25.
Sorry, that's net of the tax expenditure. So the property transfer tax surcharge raises 2.1 in the for fiscal year.
Okay, so there's 1.25. All right, that's what I needed to know. So if we don't do any of these things, we need to raise 1.2. Steve Klein is with us.
If you don't do this, the bill as a whole, you'll have to raise the money needed that was raised in this bill for the general fund. I don't know if Steve can help out on this a little bit more.
So Steve, what we're trying to figure out is since the rumor is that the surcharge on the property transfer might be a red flag for some people, it could result in the bill not going forward. If we don't do it, and we don't do any of the expenditures in this bill, which is the mobile home, how much is the budget out?
So, and Graham is going to have to catch me because I'm just coming out of a different committee, but I think if you don't do the expenditures and don't do the surcharge, the difference in the first year is I think it's 650,000. I'm not even sure, but over time, those were designed to balance out. So I think as long as you don't spend the money, then I think you are probably within, I mean, this year more than most year, it's an exact science. And so I would not say that we are relying on the extra between the surcharge. It's not exact enough to tell you that if you were to drop both of them, that would be relatively neutral, I think. But I'm
Okay.
not sure the exact numbers. Graham would have
Okay.
to,
But a manageable number.
yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I just
No,
want to
Senator
clarify,
Hardy.
because I'm looking at the fiscal note that Graham prepared, and the net impact, as Graham has said several times, is 1.85 million to the general fund.
In the first year?
In 22, correct. So that if we did nothing, it sounds to me like if we did not pass this bill at all, that we would apparently have to find 1.85 million. Now, everything's kind of, moving, so many moving parts. I get that, Steve, but I'm just wondering, is that still true? I know this fiscal note was done a few weeks ago or a couple months ago at this point. Time flies, but that's the information that because it raises more revenue than it spends, it's giving off revenue to other purposes as well.
Yeah, and I would just have to turn back to Graham on that. Our assumption was you would be providing about the same amount of money that the House had and that the governor had. And we did not get into the specifics of that. And so and there were a lot of other things that were ups and downs in the House bill. So we didn't really get down to the specific bill. I think it's more just we were looking to end up in the same financial position as the House. And so beyond that, I really think Graham is probably better suited than I am to comment. So, I mean, there may have been other ups and downs in the House that are part of that, but it's a very, it's a strange year. I mean, normally those two things do go identically. We just sort of, to get these bills moving, we basically assumed that you would be about where the governor was. You're probably the House is a little lower than where the governor was in resources in the first year. Graham's sheet, pretty much his detailed fiscal spreadsheet is probably the best source for that. We are relying essentially on that rough similarity between the two chambers.
So
Madam Chair.
we've now been told that the House has put the mobile home tax credit and the manufacturing tax
No.
on S-101.
No, the mobile home
But-
tax credit and the surcharge
Oh, the surcharge is on 101?
and the mobile home tax credit. The
Mobile
manufacturing
home tax
exemption
credit. All right.
is not on there.
So the manufacturing is not on there,
Correct.
tax credit.
Correct.
All right.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So thank you, Steve. I'm glad you said what you said. I'm trying to remember your testimony, what it was about a couple of weeks ago. Oh, not a couple of weeks ago. It must have been a couple of days ago, where we had an analogous problem, and you kept saying, "Well, this is in the bounds of reason. We expect the money to come in to be above this, and we have surplus. We could deal with this margin of error." I can't remember exactly what it was on.
Yeah.
Then we're hearing, and I'm not faulting Graham in any way. His numbers are his numbers, but the message is, we have to tax 1.85 if we don't do this. So it's A, mixed messages, and B, it's very frustrating as a member of the Finance Committee for us to be told what we have to do in raising taxes, and at this last minute, say, this is the tax. I think we're losing our authority. We're not looking at the merits of the tax. We're being told, we got to raise this number, and this is your only choice.
Senator, I don't know about this is what you have to do, but the joke was that when Senator Bartlett was in charge of appropriations, she cut up the pie and I baked it. It was not unusual for a message to come across that we need you to raise $5 million. And we'd all be sitting there until 10 o'clock at night, figuring out how to raise 5 million or 1 million or 2 million to cover the budget. It's not, this is a solution. What I was trying to figure out is if we didn't do it, was this a capsulated solution, or was there an impact on the budget? And there is, it looks like a 1.25 million impact on the budget. So we don't have to do any of this, but the budget will have a hole. And I think most of us would like to do at least the mobile home tax credit. And if we do that, we need to find a way to pay for it.
So that's
But this is not unusual.
That's only $250,000 in the first year.
The first year,
Right. To get
but
it.
you're committed for 5 years.
Good.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for saying what you just did. I didn't ever get the impression that we were being told we had to do this tax. It was more about, this is the numbers and we can do what we want. And I do think, I would like to see us do the manufactured home credit. I think that would be helpful. I'm wondering, Steve, since we have you here, is there any federal housing money that could fill in this housing credit, or is that not kosher?
No, I would think that you would not. And again, this is all, there's a lot of federal money that's come in recently, and a lot of the money can be used for manufactured housing related activities. I don't think it can be used to fund a tax credit. What it can be used, one possibility is not doing the tax credit and just letting the federal money that came in. Some of the rental assistance money actually can be used for mobile home related work and mobile home related purchases. And some things they're doing in the budget is spending money through Housing Conservation Board to pay for buying mobile homes, essentially for people to use as part of the affordable housing solution. So there's a lot of money going out right now in the budget side for the purpose you're talking about here. So one possibility would be to hold on the tax credit for a year and do this later on when you have more clarity about the needs. We're in a very unusual time in the federal dollars coming in, but I don't think you could, without doing more research, to actually take the federal dollars and use it to offset a tax credit would be something that I wouldn't yet be able to tell you could do.
Okay, but you did answer my question, because I think my impression is that there's a lot of affordable housing funding in all those federal dollars that we're getting. And so holding off on a year for this, as you suggested, may be a really good idea, and seeing if it's necessary or if there are other things we could or should do. So thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, and just to give you a flavor of it, yet today the Senate proposed to the House. I mean, the Senate had already put in more than the House, like in the neighborhood of 80, $90 million, and the Senate just proposed adding another 50 million of ARPA dedicated for affordable housing. So, I mean, you're seeing fairly dramatic dollars being put into affordable housing for exactly, and these are eligible projects, those types of things. So there is a lot of money being put in that area.
Right, okay, that's helpful. My other question is on the property tax surcharge. And I don't know which of the three of you might be able to answer this, but that, it sounds like maybe 70% of it is commercial property. And is it possible to split it out and have it just apply to residential property over $1 million or more? It is. Abby, do we have the data sufficient to do that?
Yeah, I mean,
Or Graham, sorry.
to do it just on residential property. Yeah.
That is possible. The tax department would be able to manage that. This sort of goes back to the conversation you and I have been having, Abby, about their data and how they split it out. But because that's a possibility too, if we're just looking at trying to capture, some revenue from this housing, second home housing boom, where we're just trying to get these, the next year or two of these property transfers for very wealthy second homes. We do it on just that portion, and add the language that you suggested, Abby, about being, making sure the LLC and trusts are included, and that we don't include the commercial properties, because I think there's a good argument to not include those. But I'm just throwing that out there as another option, and that would obviously raise less money, but it would.
If we add the LLCs in there for homes, Graham, do we have any, if we're aiming at 1.25 and we're going to let everything else float, can we raise it with just the tax on mansions? No.
I thought I just heard Steve say, though, that we can be a little bit more chill on that number. Isn't that what you came in and said?
Chill.
that things are still in so much flux that even though the net on this is 1.85, that we don't necessarily have to get to 1.85. So I'm really looking at sort of a different policy solution, not necessarily the number solution. If that makes any sense.
I'll leave it to Steve about how much he's willing to, give in leeway. But just on the home, you would raise about $150,000 a year.
Okay, so it's less than 30% then, if that's the case, right?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay.
Senator Pearson.
Couple of points on a question. Senator Hardy, I believe, and Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, we could say either residents or businesses. We can't say second homes. So just to be clear on that. We do, though, have, and I agree with the focus, frankly. We do have the ability, though, to set different rates, to set even a different construct. This is only on the marginal rate. We don't have to do that. So there is some flexibility. But Steve, one question though, on the bigger question of, do we even need to do this? We just enacted the EITC pass-through, and it was made clear that ARPA is actually an eligible use of ARPA money is to make up for those tax changes. So if, for instance, we elected to do that, we could cover well over the hole that we're contemplating here with that scheme. I mean, that's a different, other people have to agree to that, but I just want to make sure that that's a factual statement. Is that right?
Yeah, the problem with that is the ARPA, I mean, the EITC is a one-time, it's actually a problem, because the EITC and the dependent care, if you did that one, are essentially, we're treating them as one-time tax losses at this point. Well, probably they'll be ongoing, in which case that'll be a bigger problem for future years. But at this point, we're treating them as one time. What you're talking about in this credit, and what you're talking about is we still have this concept of base revenue versus one time. And so we handle them different ways. So what we can do is cover the we can use to cover the ARPA change we're using, or try to cover the EITC, we probably are going to use an ARPA construct, and then that money will be put into other one-time general fund needs. It's the problem is what you're dealing with is a base expense. And just to clarify, in the end, what happens is everything this committee does and everything the Appropriations Committee does has to equal exactly the same number. It's not like we do have any discretion to change that. What happens though is, and the reason I'm being less than absolutist about this is, I think it's as the chair pointed out, I mean, that there is a negotiation. If you guys all of a sudden knock a bunch of money off the table or provide a lot more, that I would assume the chair from here would go talk to the chairs of appropriations and they'd adjust you work it out. I mean, this is a process where each committee is part of the process, but we all, in most years, it is done identically where the bills come out together. This year, because of the slowness of the timing of the House and the finance bills, there's been a lot of, it's just not, the exactitude has not been there, and we're going to have to clean that up in the final bill. So I'm not saying there's a lot of room, but I'm also not, I just can't tell you that it's down to the penny here in this year.
So if we pass this as presented to us,
Mhm.
We're good. We're covering our cost, and we've made the 1.25 or whatever million. The issue might, I don't think anyone, some people might have a problem with trying to make the tax code clearer around manufactured products, especially as you get into today's assembly lines where things are done by computers, but they may never actually alter the raw material. I don't think anyone got a problem with the mobile homes. If there's anything that's going to red flag in this economic climate, it's the surcharge on business, because $1 million home implies a certain level of wealth. $1 million business at a time where businesses are not doing very well, I don't know. And this is business real estate or the business. It's business real estate, right? Not inventory. It's it's real property.
Sale of real property.
It's the farm when the farmer retires and he sells.
Yeah, but it doesn't count the cows, just the house and the barn.
But Senator Brock, that would be business, right? The farm
Yep.
sale would be a business sale, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's why I was suggesting the, trying to do it just on the residents, because
Right. But
that raises a lot less. But I also think the mobile manufactured home tax credit, while I'm supportive of that in concept, it sounds like, given all the other money that's going into affordable housing, waiting a year to see how the dust settles might be a good idea on that. And then picking it up in a year.
right.
Can I ask a question?
People might be working and feel better able to invest. Senator Sirotkin.
So just to touch on the manufacturing exemption, I thought I heard someone say early on that businesses don't even know about how this is interpreted now. So I was wondering how the joint fiscal note came with almost $1 million savings to business. Is that what, because they know that that's what's being collected on this thing right now, and just eliminating yields $1 million in savings to businesses?
That's more or less it, yes. It's data on use tax collections from manufacturers where the tax department has gone in and audited manufacturers, and they've found information that it was the tax that they are remitting for their use tax related to this exemption that they were assessing to those manufacturers. And we added a little bit of an upward adjustment to account for businesses that were incorrectly thinking that this was exempt, but not actually being audited. So the tax department originally came here with a estimate of $750,000 of loss, and we revised it slightly downward to 900,000.
Do we have any idea who these businesses are?
I do not know, not specific.
Tax information, it's confidential.
So we don't even know how many businesses. I mean, we helping a couple of businesses for a few $100,000 each, or
I think the tax department testimony was that most, if not all of these, they only collected when they went in to do an audit. And that it is so unclear that, no one is saying the businesses are trying to cheat, that the law just doesn't kind of match up with modern manufacturing processes.
Right.
And, is the conveyor belt attached or not attached? It doesn't do anything to the raw material except move it. But it's definitely part of the process of manufacturing.
I just, I picking up on what both Steve and Senator Hardy were saying. I mean, in this area as well as in housing, there's so much happening. I mean, we have so many business opportunities out there that are coming through my committee, and grants and programs, and in housing, the money is just coming in hand over fist with guidelines coming, and I just feeling uncomfortable with all of this. I mean, I think I like the idea of Senator Hardy that, we shouldn't be hitting businesses and farmers at this point. We have no idea how much they can afford this added tax, and we're making it tax policy, but it's also housing policy that, down the hall, we're very interested in making in these decisions as well. It's not just tax policy, it affects the overall housing landscape. So even though I like the idea of even just taxing resident, or I'm more comfortable taxing residents over $1 million at the marginal rate, I'm even uncomfortable with that.
Okay, Senator Bray.
I'll second what Senator Sirotkin is saying. I mean, we already have on the real estate tax, the property transfer tax, I think is always, I have just found it somewhat troubling that just by virtue of you happen to be someone who has a property transfer that year, you have an outsized obligation to chip in to the clean water work. You may be actually moving here from out of state and have nothing to do with the state of water in the state of Vermont, but you pick up an extra burden. And it doesn't seem much nexus. It seems convenient. And this seems like more of the same to me. So I'm, I know there's the thought of the Willie Sutton thing. Why do we rob banks? That's where the money is. Here's some higher value transactions going by. To me, there's just a fundamental, I'm going to say there's a fairness issue. I don't know why for this particular task, those particular sales should carry that additional burden. Other than if someone wants to say, well, there's more money being moved So this is a place where it's a little easier to pick up, but strikes me as not particularly fair or logical, given what we're trying to do.
I had a real problem when we did the surcharge on property transfer, because just as you said, this hit everybody, but only new home buyers. And I could be pouring phosphorus onto my lawn for 20 years and I'm not paying anything. And it hit those lower income folks who were really struggling to come up with a down payment and all the other charges, and it hurt. I don't have the same problem with the $1 million homes. It just thrown in with everything else. I don't. It's not logical, but if we need money, it isn't always logical. You raise it where it is. I do have some of the concerns, and I have a concern that the business tax could get this vetoed. But Senator Pearson.
Can you just clarify, because do you mean, you said the business tax could get this vetoed. The business tax changes is favorable to business. So
No, the surcharge on the sale of a business.
Oh, on that kind of property.
On that I think can put a red flag on this bill. But if we aren't doing the housing, are we doing the manufacturing tax credit? Are we just going to let all of that ride and just come in trying to raise as close to 1.25 million that the budget needs as we have to? Is that where we're kind of moving with this, Senator Bray?
Well, I guess the other side of the equation is talking to approach whether or not they want to reduce total spending by an equivalent amount, and I don't know what the dynamic is back and forth, but it does seem like a fair question as opposed to merely assume that it's an obligation to come up with it. And I'm not trying to make trouble. It just seems like, well, how does that work? Do we ever say, we'll split the difference? Who knows,
I mean, I don't think, Graham, how much? Yeah, we're short. We're not raising that much. So we're just going to tell them, we're going to let it ride. We're going to let the farmers and the businesses out. We're going to put a surcharge on the upper end homes. We can up the surcharge or we can drop the home value. Those are also possibilities to raise more funds. Or we can do nothing. So, how much are we short, Graham? If we just do the surcharge and we don't spend any money, are we still short about 800,000?
Sorry, if you just do the surcharge and
on homes,
on just homes.
Yeah.
So you'll raise about 100 if you use the same rate in the surcharge and you use the same threshold, so $1 million, and you'll raise about $100,000 instead of 2.1 million. And then that will be, decreased by the manufactured homes credit of $250,000.
No, we aren't going to do the manufactured home credits.
Okay, then you will raise $100,000.
Raise 100,000. We're really short here.
Well, I don't understand that. $100,000 if we're just doing the surcharge on residents?
Yes, that's correct. It might be, I mean, when the forecast comes out in July, it might revise the property transfer tax surcharge higher. But based on the data I have for the past 4 years, if you do this surcharge on just principal residences, you'll raise about $100,000.
And this has
Well, wait,
been a
wait, wait.
boom market.
Sorry. Not principal residents, just residents.
Residents.
So you're accounting second homes as well.
Yeah. We're trying to not do it on businesses.
Yeah.
And we're only going to raise 100,000. There, despite everything we hear, there just aren't that many
No, I think
transfers.
I don't know what it would raise if you were only to do it on just homes classified as principal residences and second homes in condos. I don't know that number off the top of my head. I have to go back to the tax department and get that.
Don't you
Well,
know?
what are we taxing if we do 100, if we only make 100,000?
That would only be principal residences. So if you applied this to just principal residences, you would.
Oh, no, why would we do that? Is that what the bill says?
The bill applies it to every type of property transfer.
Right.
Yeah, and we're saying we want to do it to residential transfers.
So that would be not principal residences and second homes.
Yes.
Okay.
And partnerships and all those as well, deeds, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how much that would raise off the top.
Okay, well, maybe we should check with the tax department and find that out. Because I don't know why we'd exempt them. I've got Senator Brock and then Senator Bray.
We're down to the level of number in which the value of the bad publicity of our raising the tax outweighs any benefit we get from the tax. This is silly. We've spent, what, an hour now talking about this, and we've spent all of our time talking about how to raise revenue, and we never, ever talk about how to reduce spending. And that says to me that, and I realize we're the tax committee, and that's our job to raise revenue. But we really, I think, need to think a little more broadly. And we're not talking about enough money to even worry about. But I do think that if we raise that surcharge, that's a headline, even if it only raises 50 cents, and it's not worth it.
Not for $100,000, it's not.
Right.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Yeah, well, it's not quite right, though. We haven't talked about reducing expenses. We talked about, could we talk to our probes and adjust the other half of the equation? So,
We just did cut out 2 major spending.
Great. We're doing our job.
Yeah, all right. I think, all right. Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I just want to say
then Pearson and then Bray.
Okay, I just want to. I mean, I ultimately I think I agree with Senator Brock in that we've gotten to the point where it's probably not worth it. However, just to counter a couple things that I've heard, I do think it's really fair to be looking at these upper income residential property transfers and what we've learned in the pandemic is that the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. And so when we're trying to figure out a way forward with a balanced budget, it makes complete sense to want to look at these, extremely high value homes that are getting purchased and sold in our state. And that's just increased significantly over the last year. And we have data to prove that. So, I think it's a fair conversation and a fair source of revenue to look at. Whether or not it's worth it at this point, given what we may have learned, I don't know. But I would like Graham to look into the full number, including both second and primary residences. So just want to say that. Thank you.
That may be a good way to stop. Senator Pearson.
And to build on that, I would just say I'm not sure where we decided to not do the mobile home tax credit. I like that idea. I think that, so I hope that's not off the table at this point. Myself and Graham.
No,
could you just-
nothing is on or off. I
Okay.
think in,
We just have a messy table. Graham, what does that particular policy cost us?
Manufactured homes credit.
That's the one that adds up over 5 years?
Yeah, so it's $250,000 every year. So
Yeah. Ultimately 1.25. Okay.
yeah, it goes up. It's 500 the second year, right? And
right.
Yeah.
Right.
and these are credits to banks.
There are credits issued usually to like VHFA, and they in turn sell them to banks who use it against.
Yeah, but it's not like a giveaway to the bank. It ultimately means they're more affordable for people that are particularly struggling for home ownership, right?
Right.
There's Sirach, and you're smiling, but help me out.
No, I'm only smiling because you were stating the obvious, that's all.
Well, I have
Okay, I
nothing-
think this
It's
this came up.
Subsidy for banks. It's not a subsidy for banks. It's to help people renovate.
No, it is not a subsidy, but it is banks are not paying in the taxes they normally would, which is a decision we make for social good. We do it for all our housing programs, and it's been very successful. I think what was suggested was that we are putting an unprecedented amount of money into affordable housing. And that, remember the testimony that ARPA funds can be used for mobile homes and helping people buy and buy up. And again, because this is so unprecedented, we don't know how much demand is out there. And so perhaps this year we go with the ARPA funding and hold off with the tax credit until we get a better sense of what's, coming down. And if all we're making is 100,000 now with that $1 million home thing, that was driven by people trying to get out of the cities, probably primarily New York, by the pandemic with all right. Well, that's settled down now. And so that's not, we saw this after 9/11. We saw a boom in sales in Vermont for people who wanted out of the city just in case.
Well, it is still screaming, Madam Chair.
It's still, but the one thing about the real estate market, and it was boom before the pandemic. So we're looking at statistics from some boom years, is that it goes up and it comes down. And frequently it comes down very hard and fast. So to count on 100,000 a year has some risk to it because the market will come down. Always does. And if interest rates start to go up, that will cool the market. So it's not, it's got some, there's some risk in banking that money for any extended amount of time.
Yeah, but if wages go up, the market will climb. I mean, I'm happy doing it for a 5-year sunset that matches the mobile home credit. I mean, this is anyway. It is continuing to boom. You're seeing shocking property values go up and get gobbled up in a day or two, and
I'm hoping that because I'm about to put my daughter's house on the market, but I don't feel
take
your
more than 3 days,
confidence.
Madam Chair. You've
I don't live in Chittenden County. And your real
not.
estate
I
market it is booming.
I'm just trying to get
But
the
I've been to
facts
some
look and help
sections of the state where it isn't booming. And no, the $1 million homes, we can do it. But I'm just saying that there is some risk in counting that money because it can be a very volatile market. But if we want to pay for that, we were looking at just doing homes, residents, as a way to make up the money that the budget has spent, not to do the manufacturing or the manufactured homes credits. If we want to do either one of those, we've got to raise more money. And we need to find a way, if we don't want to tax businesses, and I would agree, the optics of taxing businesses and farms as businesses right now might not be the best. Whereas the optics of taxing $1 million plus homes is probably got a lot of sympathy. We need to find another place to raise revenue. So, Graham, can you help us?
I don't know if I can help you, but I have the data from the tax department here broken out by type of home. So I can tell you how much you would raise if you just did it on homes.
Okay, if we do all residential homes over $1 million, okay.
We're counting primary residences and secondary residences. So these are property transfers that have a structure built on them intended for the use of a primary residence or a secondary residence. And if you did that, you would raise about $400,000.
Well, that's better, but I think that also tells us that it's the secondary residences. We just doubled the amount of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That might be worth it. That we're reaching the point where it's
We're almost
worth the
halfway
amount.
there.
Yeah. So I thank you for getting that so fast, Graham. That's really super helpful. I think we should do that. And maybe we sunset it, Madam Chair. I don't know, but
I thought we were doing it, so
we need to take
that's good.
advantage of the fact that all these people are moving here and buying second homes, and it's still happening. It's not just Chittenden County. I mean, we saw the data of
No, not the $1 million ones.
right. It's there are lots of those happening. So
And I would just also add, I mean, the categories here are kind of blended. So there's an other category, and that includes things like condos in it. I don't know if that's something the committee wants.
Why wouldn't we tax $1 million condos?
I don't know, but the way this is broken out, the data I have, if the intent is to raise money from transfers that are related to the hot housing market of sorts. There's primary residences, there's secondary residence, and then within sort of the giant other category, I know that condos live within that as well. So you might get a little bit more than 400,000. Another 100,000 comes from open land. So people just purchasing land. I don't know if that's
They then put in current use.
So yeah, I don't know whether what they're doing with the land. They're just buying pieces of land. So it's So I guess what I'm saying is I see what the committee sort of intended, and I'm trying to sort of maybe help you understand where the dollars are. But just the sort of secondary and primary, you're talking about 400,000. If you sort of add condos to that, you're adding a little bit more. And then if you add open land, you're adding another 100,000 to it.
That's close enough.
So we're easily at $500,000.
Yep.
What happens if we make less of it marginal or play with that a little bit?
I can't do that with the data in front of me. The way it would have to work is you'd have to tell me what the the cutoff you'd want, and then I have to request that data from the tax.
Less of it marginal, as in starting at a $900,000 house?
No, there's a, it's like the income tax where your first 30,000 is
Yeah.
taxed, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
This just hits the surcharge above $1 million.
above.
If we're talking about a home, I'd come down even, or if you want to stick with marginal, we could come down to still a big number, like a $700,000 home is not somebody that's trying to figure out, I don't know. It just,
There's something excessive about the word million. You get 700,000. I'm starting to worry about what my house might be worth, given what one or two of my neighbors have sold for. But I'm not selling today. Yeah.
I just wonder, as I listen to the discussion, what else we might do to lower the desirability of Vermont as a place to buy an expensive home.
There is also that. I've got Senator Bray and then Senator Pearson.
Yeah, so I think I may be in, well, company, somewhat odd man out. Well, maybe with Senator Brock. It just, I'm not sure. I'm just not comfortable with the idea that we're picking a particular type of transaction and we're saying, if you are a person of means, apparently, because you could buy one of these, you should just inherently pay more. I don't understand why. For instance, I mean, are we saying, oh, this is a redistribution of wealth scheme? And so we're just looking for yet another mechanism to do that? Someone, fine, we can just put that on the table. I didn't really think of taxation as necessarily a redistribution of wealth task. Not in all, sometimes yes, other times no. And in this case, it doesn't feel to me like that's what we were aiming for. So that's probably part of it. I would say there's the side of the equation when someone of means comes and moves, they also do a lot probably in their community in terms of purchasing and spending, and there's an economic value that comes along with having them there. So I'm just a little uncomfortable labeling people based on their ability to pay, at a certain level, and then just saying, okay, so that in this case, when you're buying a property, we're asking you to pay more for other things in Vermont as well. So it's, if our marginal income tax, I'm right there, no problem, seems appropriate to me. I haven't sorted out why this one feels different, but I'm just being honest with the committee.
I think this one, when we were raising those taxes and putting money into mobile home taxes, that has a logical sense. Or we're raising from folks that can afford very nice homes,
right,
and helping folks that can't afford anything. We could also put it in to down payment assistance, which is a major issue. There's all kinds of things we could do. There's a logic there. But we still haven't raised enough money to cover the budget. Never mind the mobile home tax credit. And so we're going to have to do something else. And I think the optics of $1 million is good. You start getting below that, it doesn't quite ring as well. And and if there's land attached, you can get there.
If I may, then if the funds were raised to help others who are less fortunate to have housing, then that seems like a nexus and compelling reason. If it's simply because we want to spend more money generally in the state of Vermont, then I think that's where I get lost.
Yeah, and that as the bill came to us, there was a a logical nexus. We were taxing businesses, we were giving businesses, or at least manufacturing businesses, a reduction. We were taxing high-end homes and we were putting the money into low-end homes. And oh, by the way, we also had $1 million go into the budget. But that's, the problem is if we don't want to tax businesses, or maybe we don't want to tax all businesses, maybe we could get a higher number for a really big business. That might work. I don't know. Senator Hardy, I don't think I had anyone ahead of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think
I
I've
guess-
got Pearson next.
A couple things. I mean, I guess I look at budgeting, and budgets include revenues and expenses. I look at it holistically and as a sort of, full picture of our values as a state and as a Senate, and then later as a state. And the sort of tit for tat budgeting that it seems to be the way that things have traditionally worked made me really uncomfortable my first session. And I see it playing out here again, because it's not tit for tat. The bill came to us and it was more of a, tit for tat kind of bill, but we really should be thinking holistically about the broader picture of what we're trying to fund and do and achieve and support in our state. And taxation is absolutely a tool for promoting equity and for promoting the values that we hold. And we can disagree on those values, and I'm sure we do. But for example, when we passed the S53 originally, as we passed it out of this committee, the quote unquote tampon tax, I spoke with a lot of people about how we were using our taxation system as a way to promote gender equity or to underscore gender equity, because those of us who menstruate shouldn't have to pay a tax just because we menstruate. And most people who menstruate identify as women. And so that's a good example, a simple example. And I think this is another example. We're saying we need to, as the bill came to us, we've scaled back significantly what is in the bill. We can hold off on the housing credits because we have all this other housing money. We can, maybe now is not the time to be increasing business taxes. The manufacturing thing seems a little confusing and maybe not as urgent. All those kind of arguments, but we still are trying to holistically budget for our state. And I think it's completely fair to say, if you can afford $1 million home, a primary residence or a secondary residence, then you can afford a little bit of a surcharge in order for the state of Vermont to meet its budgetary values and goals, and especially now during a pandemic, while we're trying to come out of a pandemic. And so I think it's absolutely defensible, especially now that we've realized that the number is a little bigger than we originally did. So I guess I would just push back a little bit on the sort of thinking about this as a tit for tat and really trying to think about it holistically. Thanks.
Okay. Senator Sorokin. You're
You're
muted,
muted.
Michael. You're still muted, Michael.
I know.
There you are.
Oh, I know I'm back.
I'm gonna have you muted, Michael, on a sweatshirt someday.
I guess on the last point, I these YouTube things are challenging, but going back to combining Senator Hardy's point and Senator Brock's point, if we just do this tax in isolation, not only do I think is that going to not, it may not sell well, but I'm sure it's not going to sell well with the governor. You know, I feel that if we're going to do any part of this tax, we probably should do the mobile home tax credit. But I feel I'm obviously a big affordable housing advocate, and practically maybe that makes sense. But I do recognize all the money that's coming in other areas for housing. And also, I think this is a housing decision that in terms of combining all these programs, how to best do it, this is very much in isolation. And as a housing committee, I'm interested in seeing where the best place to put that $1.25 million in. And I don't think we're necessarily getting that chance. And that's what this is in terms of the tax credits, it's really a subsidy to people buying mobile homes, even though banks pay less money into the general fund. In this case, what's going on is they're paying for those tax credits 90% or higher for those tax credits, and we're deferring general fund taxes to let them, they pay less in, but they pay for those credits. So the ultimate beneficiary, obviously, of these credits is subsidies to low-income people, which I support, but I'm not sure this is the best way to do it. And we're not discussing various options for mobile home folks. We're just discussing one in isolation, and we're about to make that decision.
Okay. I don't remember who I saw next. Senator Pearson, did you have your hand up at some point?
Well,
No?
a few times, but I don't think I have anything that poignant to add. We've made Vermont so unattractive over the years, over the decades, Senator Brock, that nobody moves here, except for we're booming right now for very rich people. And if you walk down the street and ask people if we made it a little more expensive as they buy $1 million home, so more people could afford a mobile home, I don't think that's really a controversial thing. If that raises a veto pen, I'm comfortable with that, Madam Chair. And it is tax policy that is directly driven at income inequality, Senator Bray. It's not a little bit tangential, it's direct. Rich people pay a bit more. We help people buy a mobile home. I'm frankly baffled by some of this discussion. What I don't know is frankly the decision points that are in front of us. And I don't have a clue how we figure that out. Seems like usually at this point of the year, we're sort of given a menu of options, but I look forward to getting there. And I think this has been an interesting discussion.
I think the decision points, this came to us as a bill that covered its cost plus put $1 million into the general fund. All right. And it took money from businesses and high income homes. I'm not sure they're high income businesses or high value businesses. And it put it in to both a tax break, credit, whatever, a tax reduction for some businesses and money to help low-income people. Okay, there's been several issues raised that we have to decide. One is this the time to tax business sales? Especially, I'm not sure $1 million is a big business. Second, is this the time to do this, to invest in mobile homes when there is so much money out there right now, we could well exceed the demand. It's like we got all the rent money and there's no way we had that much rent arrearages. So we haven't had experience with this much money. So I think our first decision is, are we going to do anything now? That doesn't mean we can't do it next year. Or, you know, when we see how all the affordable housing shakes out and we see where the need is once we've been through the ARPA, or do we do the mobile home tax credit? Because that's a traditional program we've all liked and it's, you know, but is that where the demand is going to be right now? Or is there enough money to cover that demand? I don't know. We have $1 million, but I'm pretty sure they can cover it in the budget that we're supposed to raise for them. So the question is, yeah, what we're making decisions here, but we're kind of in the middle of, there's so much money moving in and out. I don't know. I'd feel better if we put money into a down payment assistance for people, because affordable housing generally means people who couldn't qualify for a mortgage. When we're doing rental housing, it's perpetually subsidized because they can't afford to pay the rent that it takes to cover the cost. And so we subsidize it. When you get into people trying to buy homes, if you're paying over $1,000 a month or over 40%, 50% of your income in rent, there's no way that an average working person can save up a 20% deposit on. That's a crying need for lower income homes. And we have one credit, but we've never talked about putting money in there. And I don't know what housing is talking about. They're talking about building, I think.
Madam Chair, isn't that what the mobile home tax credit does? Is effectively it helps people get into their first one, right? So
But only a mobile home, and mobile homes don't appreciate.
Manufactured homes we're talking about?
Manufactured homes, yes, you have to have them tied down to sell them.
Yep.
But they do not appreciate. So if I buy a stick-built house, in 5 years, 10 years, I'm going to have some equity. Unless things change, but that's the reason you can't get a mortgage on them, is because they depreciate. And the newer ones may not, but that's a new market. So I've got Senator Sirotkin and then Senator Bray.
I think, Senator Pearson, it's mostly for replacing people's dilapidated, uninhabitable mobile homes with new mobile homes. That's the primary function. This pot of money is divided three ways. It's divided for the down payment assistance program, for the mobile home program, and the affordable housing tax credit, which I think runs through VHCB as one of the stacking elements to a lot of the housing they do.
Wait, which
For some reason, this has been chosen by the House, and it may be right or wrong, as where the bump is going to come to this particular third. I don't know if it's a third, one of the three purposes to this one.
Okay. But do we know how much demand there is out there?
I would think there's probably plenty of demand. I mean, it's not a huge program, though. This is doubling the size of the program. I think it's going from like 250,000, or it's eventually going to be, Graham could probably tell us, but I think that's what I was told. This credit over 5 years would double the size of the program.
I've got Senator Bray.
So the depreciation point, I'd be interested to know whether or not that's true for the newer generation of homes, like for mods. For I just don't.
The net zero homes,
Right.
they're too new to know. I'm almost guarantee you they haven't been bought and sold.
Okay. And I hate to see anyone baffled. So my comment came when we were talking about taking off the table the mobile home piece. So if we're talking about a surcharge on expensive homes to help people have a home, then I'm back to fine with it. But if it was just going to be becoming sort of a general revenue scheme to do other things, then I think then it seemed less appropriate to me. So
Can we settle on Senator McDonald?
Madam Chair, this is a fascinating conversation. We've watched the last several decades where we've, as a country, and some degree this state, has sought to increase people's wealth and prosperity by cutting taxes for people that are well-to-do. And we keep doing that. And at the same time, we look around and see that people are having trouble buying their first home. They can't earn the money to be successful. We see that the folks for whom the taxes have been cut own several homes. Many of those of us here in the legislature have homes that we can unload to people that wish to come here from this state and turn a handy profit. And we may have a second home on a lake somewhere or elsewhere. And what we've watched is a redistribution of wealth in this country for 30 years. It's been driven in large part by tax policy, which has sought to redistribute the wealth in this country in the effort to make everyone better off. And it is, every time we get a crisis, every time we get a hurricane, every time we get a housing bubble, and now when we have COVID, there are folks that are working and scrambling and buying at discounts and enhancing their position to come out of this pandemic better off than when they went in. And there are others that are hanging on. They're being subsidized by rent stabilization.
For quality assurance, please choose from the following options. If you are calling to speak with an agent from the Department of Human
Senator Bray,
Resources,
perhaps you could mute.
Yeah, okay.
And there are
I
people
couldn't
that
figure out
are
who was talking. All right.
busy running commercials on radio and whatever as part of this scramble. Sitting to watch until the dust settles if you got to be moving in this economy, and you have to be headed in a direction that you think makes sense. And that goes for those of us in the legislature who often find that it's safer to sit around and wait for the dust to settle. We're talking about taxation of businesses. 20 some years ago, we eliminated the machinery and equipment tax for manufacturing in this state. That was a tax that was paid every single year. And we did that as part of Act 60. I don't know if people recall that the biggest winner in the city of Burlington was the Burlington Free Press that got the biggest tax cut on that one. Today, we're talking about eliminating the sales tax on the one-time purchase of packaging machinery. The reason businesses buy packing machinery is to unemploy people that used to pack stuff. That's our future. Unemploying people and using machines makes more profits for businesses. To have them make more profit and to cut the one-time tax on sales tax for them is a pretty good deal. Many of our citizens who can't buy their first home, who struggle paying, their food bills, wonder what we're doing here. And if sitting around and waiting for the dust to settle is what we're doing, heck, that's the easiest thing in the world to do. So I get frustrated, Madam Chair, and sometimes it bubbles over and my manner is crude. But I think that our citizens who watch people come in and purchase homes in some of our resort communities for great amounts of money that are their second and third homes, they don't resent that for its own sake. They resent it because they ask us, well, what about us? I mean, how come we can't buy a first home or second home? What are you in the legislature doing? And are we worried about ourselves? Are we worried about, I don't know, but sitting around and waiting for things to change without us making the change is going to continue to result in more redistribution of wealth through tax policy and state policy, and keeps going to the top. That's what we're doing. So I'm not ashamed to redistribute some in the other direction and see if we couldn't do, for working people, we couldn't do much worse than we're doing now if we sit around and don't do anything. So that's my long-winded speech, Madam Chair. And there's no one better than yourself, Madam Chair, for knowing the myriad parts of all the different cogs that contribute to these decades of folks falling behind, and you articulate them better than the rest of us. But we need to have a plan to put all our knowledge together to move in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. But what would you suggest that we do now?
Oh, I would vote for the tax increase on the surcharge. I would deal with the manufactured housing, and I would say, well, that's dealt with. That was easy. That's a balanced budget. I'm sure the governor's going to support that. He supports working people and he supports affordability, and he'll be right there behind us. And if he vetoes it, I would be shocked, and maybe the citizenry would be shocked. But I would then go on to the next item.
Is it the surcharges on homes only?
Well, you do homes, whether they're transferred by deed or by other ownership.
All residences.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
still over $1 million short.
Yeah, put another surcharge on when it hits the 2nd million.
I don't think we're going to make that much doing that. I think what we're trying to figure out is what are we going to do now? I think most of us would like to do the mobile home tax credit, and we would like to raise the money to cover it, plus the money that's in the budget. And I think we'd even tell the budget to eat it if we can come close. But so far, we're closer now if we do, we're over 500,000, right? But
at least.
No, we're at 500,000. And that's if we tax open land, condos, and all residences. And we're at somewhere around 500,000. But the cost is going to be 500,000 in 1 year. And it's going to be 1.25 million in 4 or 5 years. And we don't have the money to cover that, plus the 1.25 in the budget.
Let me
So
ask
we
a
gotta
question.
find 1.25 million at least.
May I ask a question regarding the open land?
Yeah.
Are you
Graham.
dealing with open land that may be held for commercial purposes, such as large tracts of woodland and so on? I thought that the intent, at least the discussion, was about doing things that were residentially related.
Senator, the data that I have from the tax department, so I can't say what the intention is that open land, but there are categories broken down by the tax department in the data I have here for industrial, for timberland, for farms. So to the extent that they're, part of a timber operation or a farm operation, they're counted separately from this open land. I think this open land is more generally thought of as land for sale for the purpose of building something, whether it be commercial or for residential use.
Talking over $1 million, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably open land overlooking a very nice lake or some pretty ski mountains. It's not.
Madam Chair, if it's over $1 million, they'll sell you 2 parcels that are $500,000. So that's,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a business. They'll
Yes,
buy it and
so-
put it in current use, so run it out to the farmer to hay it. All right, Senator Pearson.
Madam Chair, I heard you say this, or I don't know if this is what you meant, but I thought I heard you say potentially in the non-residential land or transactions, maybe we could go at a higher level. And Graham, I'm wondering if you have data that would help us. Let's say we didn't say for $1 million, but for business or non-residential parcels, if it was over $3 million, what?
It's residential, it's business real estate, so it doesn't do your business inventory.
No, I
Allen
understand. But the
Lumber in
value,
Mon-
I'm
yeah.
saying the same treatment that the House has proposed for $1 million. What if we just said, well, that doesn't kick in until 2 million or 3 million? I'm wondering if we can make it up, because we're not light years away here, and I just wonder if you have the data, Graham, to figure that out for us. And you're muted.
Not on what I have available. What I have available right now is the House did consider a threshold of 1.5 million. And so I have that data. I can tell you what you could raise on that with a 0.5 cent surcharge on $1 million on everything. You would raise about $1.5 million.
On it.
On everything. So I'm including commercial properties. I'm including, residences, non-resident, everything.
Over 1, okay, so if we did residences over 1 and commercial properties over 1.5.
If you combine the two, I don't know what you've raised just on the commercial properties part on 1.5. What I have for the 1.5 data is not broken out by that fine detail that I have for the 1 million.
Maybe this would be a good time to break and give Graham time to talk with the tax department and see if we can figure out, I just think of the former member of the House, who I believe chaired Ways and Means in my early day, who owned what was called a resort in Stowe, but in my day, we would have called it a motel with a restaurant. But nothing fancy. I'm just wondering what properties like that, $1 million is a high-end house. It's a minuscule percentage of housing sales. I'm trying to figure out what a good, Allen Lumber in Montpelier, which is basically one big warehouse, sold for $600,000. It's a warehouse. It has a small office.
Yeah, if Graham could get us a bit of the striations, that that might help us
That might help us.
move forward. I don't know.
And could we meet? I'm not going to ask Graham to do this by 9 o'clock tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. Maybe we could meet when we get off the floor. I'll be in a good mood. I think I have to do the miscellaneous tax tomorrow. But maybe this, oh no, what have we got on for tomorrow? Oh, we're going back to corporate income tax. Okay, well, we will do this first tomorrow. And our Faith, are we meeting at 1 or 1:30?
1:30.
Let's plan on meeting at 1. Can we do that? Sandra Hardy?
Yes, I can do that. I completely agree that we should try to get more information from Graham. Thank you. That will be helpful. I'm wondering if we could also get a little bit more information on what's in the budget regarding affordable housing, specifically what might already be in the budget regarding manufactured homes, if there is anything. Because I still remain, I still think that maybe waiting a year on this might be better, but maybe not. I don't know. So I'd like to get a better sense of what's already happening for housing. And Michael, I don't know, or Senator Sorokin, I don't know if you could do that. You're muted, but.
There's quite a bit of money. I'm trying to remember, there's plenty of money potentially available for mobile home. I think a lot of it goes to VHCB, and within their charge, they can support mobile homes quite a bit. I don't know how much is specifically mandated as targeted to that group, but certainly that could be found out by staff at this point.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And maybe just seeing if this was passed in the House a long time ago, is this something that, given how things have changed, is it something that's still a priority for affordable housing folks, or are other things superseding it at this point?
I know it is a priority. I've been told as recently as last week that it was a priority in the House. Senator Pearson.
It must be a priority because they're watching. And I did get information that said that because this is a program that for the mobile home assistance or tax credit does exist, they have 100 applicants every year for 30 slots. So did you say they were trying to double it, Senator Sorokin?
Well, that's what the proposal does in terms of money.
So that will still presumably leave need, but my hunch, I don't know that this is, there's a whole strata of affordable housing, Madam Chair, as you've said, for homes. This is something different, and is for a population that too often slips through the cracks. So anyway, just that data point. That
So we'll let
applicants for 30 people they can handle in the current setup.
So we will let Graham find out how we can work, how we can define a high-end business or what is a comparable to the $1 million home, see if we can come out and maybe, the budget is a thing in flux. Maybe we could ask what would happen if we don't come up with the 1.25 million that was going into the general fund. How bad would it be? Okay, Graham, I think that's probably a question for Stephanie.
Yeah, I can relay the question to Stephanie.
Okay, I think we're all gonna, I think this is about as far as we're gonna go constructively. We will do this first tomorrow, and then if anybody's got any strength left, we'll move into the corporate income tax. You're getting off easy. We haven't gone into the dark hours. And we aren't meeting this weekend, unlike Senate Education. they're meeting on S13. Maybe but that was Brian's plan this morning when it got dumped on him. So maybe
Yeah.
they can work it out a little better, but
Madam Chair, any idea if we have to meet Monday?
I am not. Health and Welfare is meeting at noon on Monday, so I'm not. No, this is our last bill to get out. And as much as we'd like to do it, I'm not sure there would be a cataclysmic event if we failed. But this is it. And yes, Senator Sorokin.
Well, there's at least one bill coming from my committee tomorrow, I think.
Oh, okay. No, this is the last bill that we had to get out. There may well be bills coming from other committees.
Okay.
And next week, the agenda just says, watch your emails.
Okay.
Because it will be announced with 10-minute notice, and it's bad here because we can't run up and down the halls looking for folks, but just keep your phones close by.
Okay.
So Senator Hardy and then Senator Bray. Senator Hardy. Would you waving?
You're
Yeah.
muted.
No, I was just scratching my head. I'm sorry.
Ah.
I add, this sounds like a good plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Thanks for your willingness to ask sort of, the appropriation side if there's an opportunity. I'm 100% behind supporting affordable housing, including mobile home parks. I live right near two, and anyway, I'll leave all that alone. It just strikes me that this year of all years, we came back in January with a $211 million surplus we hadn't counted on. It was an impressive turnaround. We've had roughly $1 billion of ARPA money, not all here, but some here and some on its way. And then we're on the horizon, there's something like 800 million perhaps of American Jobs Act money. So that the only way we can get something done is to raise a tax rate. Seems to me, if it would seem as though, I don't know how that could be the only answer in a year like this. That's part of what I just want to understand, why we're a little bit in this box.
And I agree with Senator Bray on that. I support the tax credit. I'm not sure that there are not other ways to skin that cat. But I do remember, I share what Senator Cummings said. I remember opposing the surcharge last time around. There was no correlation to
I
water.
think you and I were it, Michael.
And people got up and say, oh, it's sunsetting after 2 years, to which I said on the Senate floor, I've got a bridge I can sell you in Brooklyn. The other thing that's interesting about the surcharge is that maybe we took a little testimony on this, but there's really not a lobbying group or an advocacy group representing new people coming into Vermont buying housing. They don't even know they're coming here yet. So there's nobody opposing this kind of tax. They're sort of silent on that. And, maybe it's a little different when you're parsing it out for wealthier people, but this, any surcharge we put on this is never going away. And I just have some fear of that. And I wouldn't want to do that tax. Having said that, I wouldn't want to do that tax unless we definitely accompany it with the credit for manufactured homes. But I agree with Senator Bray. It's just in the big picture of things here, this is so small, and why we're just focused on this as the only solution concerns me.
Big stuff.
Brock. Yeah.
I share some of Senator Sorokin's concern. A couple of years ago, we created, in fact, I sponsored the Tax Structure Commission. the purpose of which was to go and take a look at all of our various taxes, to integrate them better together, to make them more fair, to make them more predictable, and to stop the kind of thing that we're doing here today, in which we pick an individual tax and we spend 2 hours talking about something that amounts to, by my count, 0.07% of the budget. An infinitesimal amount. And when we were at 400,000, it was less than that. It got into the thousandths of a percent. But we sometimes fail to understand the implications of things that we do, such as surcharges. If we take a look at $1 million house, for example, when it's sold, what does that generate? If we have a tax like this generates $5,000 in additional surcharge taxes to the state. But if a sale does not occur because of the tax, or because of the implications of it, or because of the bad advertising we get as a result of it, what do we lose in terms of the amount of revenue that every time we have one of those sales, it would occur? There are lawyers involved, there are real estate people involved. Typically, there's work that's going to be done on the property immediately, and a new buyer does something. And all of those represent economic activity. And one of the things I think that we want to do is we don't want to just attract poor people to Vermont. We also want to attract wealthy people to Vermont, because they're the ones who are going to pay more taxes, hopefully, for the future. And that Vermont and Vermonters are going to benefit as a result. I realize there's that temptation to adopt the Robin Hood theory of taxation when we see a target out there. But in my mind, we have to be careful to understand what are the implications of what we do, and is the gain that we're going to get worth what we are potentially going to lose. And we've spent today, an hour and a half discussing what essentially is decimal dust in the budget. And I just wonder if this has been a really good use of our time.
I'm going to wrap this up, guys. Senator Hardy, one last question, comment.
I get the final word.
Yes,
well,
this time.
Well, I just want to pick up on one point that you made, Senator Brock. Decimal dust is such a fun word, but the Blue Ribbon Task Force, or whatever it's called, we didn't get that much testimony on it. And I, for one, am really interested in digging into that more. And Senator Pearson and I have been talking about trying to do something, with us, because we love each other so much, this whole committee, to get together in the off session to maybe talk about it further. Because I completely agree that we need a better, more comprehensive look at things. And that was sort of what I was trying to get at before, is we can't just look at one item singularly. We need to look at the big picture of the budget, revenues, and expenditures. And so I would definitely support a broader look at our taxation system, and doing it through that report would be helpful.
Senator Brock may have been referring back to the original 10-year ago
I'm
tax.
referring to both.
Yeah,
I'm referring to both.
I mean, they did a lot of work on income tax in the first,
Yep, they did.
the first.
Unfortunately, they didn't get to property tax, which is why we had to have the second one.
No, and so we did a second one, and they did get to property tax, but just in one area. So with that, I'm going to call us adjourned. I will see everybody at 1 o'clock tomorrow, unless something unexpected happens and you get an email.